The morning. Abigail Whitmore dumped an entire pot of stew onto Sheriff Calloway's boots. The whole town of Willow Creek went silent. He had just told her loud enough for every soul on Main Street to hear that a woman her size had no business dreaming about being loved. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She set the empty pot down on the counter, looked him dead in the eye and said, "Then I reckon I'll keep feeding people who deserve it more than you." If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please hit that button right now and follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The stew was still dripping off Sheriff Calloway's boots when he grabbed his hat off the floor, his face the color of a sunburned beet, and pointed one thick finger straight at Abigail. "You just made the worst mistake of your life, woman." Abigail didn't flinch. She stood behind her counter with both hands flat on the worn wooden surface, her chestnut hair coming loose from its bun, her brown eyes steady and unblinking. "The worst mistake I ever made," she said quietly, "was letting men like you eat at my table for free." A few people at the corner tables looked down at their plates. One older cowhand near the window let out a sound that was half cough, half laugh, and quickly covered his mouth. Calloway's jaw tightened. He took one step forward. "You know what this town thinks of you, Abby Whitmore." "I know exactly what this town thinks of me." She reached beneath the counter and pulled out a clean rag, dragging it slowly across the wood. "Doesn't stop me from opening those doors at sunrise every single morning." He leaned in close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "You're a fat, lonely woman running a hole-in-the-wall kitchen that nobody comes to unless they got nowhere else to go." The room went very still. Abigail folded the rag neatly, set it on the counter, looked up at him. "Then I guess the hungry and the lonesome better have somewhere to go," she said. "Now get out of my kitchen, Sheriff, and next time you pay like everybody else." For a long moment, Calloway didn't move. The whole room held its breath. Then he jammed his hat back on his head, turned, and walked out without another word. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the tin cups hanging on the wall. The room exhaled. Old Pete Granger, who had been eating his breakfast in the corner every weekday for 11 years, raised his coffee mug in Abigail's direction. "That was the finest thing I've seen since Tommy Briggs rode his horse backwards down Main Street on a dare." Abigail let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her hands out of sight beneath the counter were shaking. But she smiled, because that was what Abigail Whitmore did. She smiled, she cooked, she opened the doors, and she kept going. She had been doing it since she was 19 years old, when her mother died and left her a cast-iron stove, a small plot of land at the edge of town, and a recipe book with grease-stained pages and handwritten notes in the margins. The kitchen had been her mother's dream before it became hers. A simple wooden building on the south edge of Willow Creek, right off the cattle trail that wound east through the low hills toward Carson County. Cowboys and drovers passed through in steady streams during the summer months, stopping for water and a hot meal before pushing on. Some paid, some couldn't. Abigail fed them either way. The townspeople had opinions about that. The townspeople had opinions about everything that concerned Abigail Whitmore. She was 25 years old, unmarried, full-figured in a way that gave certain men in Willow Creek license to say things that no decent person should say out loud. Her waist was wide, her arms were round. She moved through the narrow space behind her counter with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had spent her whole life navigating a world that did not build its spaces with her in mind. She had learned somewhere around age 16 that no amount of apology or shrinking would make those people kinder. So she stopped apologizing. She stopped shrinking. She cooked good food, she kept her kitchen clean, and she let the work speak for itself. Most mornings it did. Some mornings like this one, the sheriff of Willow Creek needed reminding. By midday, the kitchen had filled and emptied twice. Abigail moved through the lunch rush alone. She had no staff, just her own 2 hands and a pace she had built over years of working from before sunup to after sundown. Salt pork and beans. Cornbread with a dark crust, the way the drovers liked it. Coffee strong enough to wake a dead man. She was refilling the pot when the door opened again. She didn't look up. "Be with you in just a minute." No answer. She set the pot back on the stove and turned. A man stood just inside the doorway. He was tall, a full head above most of the men who came through, with dark brown hair pushed back from his face and several days of growth along his jaw. His shirt was light cotton, faded from the sun. His leather vest was cracked at the shoulders. His boots were worn down at the heels, caked with the particular orange-red dust of the Carson County Trail. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Brown, quiet, watching everything without appearing to watch anything at all. He didn't look like a man who had just arrived somewhere. He looked like a man who had been traveling so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand still. "Sit anywhere," Abigail said. "I'll bring you coffee." He moved to a table near the far wall, the one most people avoided because the afternoon sun hit it full in the face. He pulled out the chair, set his hat on the table, and sat down without asking what she had or how much it cost. She brought the coffee first. He wrapped both hands around the cup and didn't drink right away, just held it. "You want something to eat?" she asked. "What have you got?" "Salt pork and beans, cornbread. That's what's left from the noon rush." "That's fine." She brought the plate. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he hasn't seen in a while. Then he ate, slowly, carefully, like he was trying to make it last. Abigail went back to her cleaning. She didn't ask questions. She had learned long ago that travelers on the cattle trail were not stopping for conversation. They were stopping because their bodies needed fuel and their feet needed rest. Whatever story they were carrying was their own. She was wiping down the far table when she noticed his hands. The knuckles were cut. Not fresh cuts, a few days old, already scabbing over. And there were calluses on his palms that didn't quite match the rest of him. His bearing was straight, almost formal, in the way of a man used to giving orders rather than taking them. But the calluses said he'd been working with his hands recently, hard and long. She didn't say anything about it. When he finished eating, he reached into his vest pocket and set 2 coins on the table. "Not a lot. Enough." He stood and reached for his hat. "There's more cornbread if you want it," Abigail said without looking up from what she was doing. "No extra charge." A pause. "Why not?" She looked up then. "Because you ate everything on that plate without leaving a scrap, which tells me the last real meal you had wasn't today. And because my mother always said cornbread doesn't cost anything to make twice as much of." Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile. More like the shape a smile would leave behind if someone had taken it away. "Much obliged, ma'am." "Abigail," she said. "Everybody calls me Abby." He looked at her for a moment. "Nate," he said. "Done." He came back the next morning, and the morning after that. By the 4th day, Abigail had figured out that he was working somewhere nearby. Probably the Deacon spread 2 miles east, which was always short on seasonal labor during the summer. He arrived at the same time each morning, sat at the same table, ordered the same thing, and left without lingering. How was polite, quiet. He tipped his hat when he came in and when he left. He said please and thank you, which Abigail noted because half the men who came through her door had apparently never been introduced to either word. On the 5th morning, he arrived to find Abigail dealing with a situation. 3 younger cowboys passing through on their way north, by the look of them, had taken a table near the window and were making a production out of ordering everything on the board while commenting loudly on Abigail's size every time she walked past. Lord, the whole floor shook when she came through that door. "You reckon she makes so much food on account of needing to taste it all herself?" Laughter. The kind meant to be heard. Abigail carried their plates to the table without a word, set each one down with the same steady hands she used for every customer, smiled the same smile she gave everyone. The tallest one looked up at her as she turned to go. "Hey, you got a husband somewhere, or does he run away every time you sit down?" More laughter. Abigail paused, turned back slowly. "Sir," she said, "I cooked that food fresh this morning, and I'm not going to apologize for a single thing on that plate. But if your manners are as empty as your belly was 5 minutes ago, I'm going to have to ask you to take your business elsewhere." The tall one opened his mouth. "Don't." The word came from across the room, calm and flat and absolutely certain. Nate was standing at his table. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. There was something in his tone, The particular quality of a man who was accustomed to speaking once and being heard that cut through the noise without effort. The tall cowboy looked over, took in the size of him, the steadiness of his expression, made a quick calculation. "We ain't looking for trouble," the cowboy said. "Then I suggest you eat your breakfast and keep your comments about the lady to yourself." Nate picked up his coffee cup and sat back down. "Unless you'd like to take this conversation somewhere with more room." He said it the way a man says something that is absolutely not a question. The three cowboys ate the rest of their meal in silence and were gone within 10 minutes. After they left, Abigail came to Nate's table and refilled his coffee without being asked. He looked up at her. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No," he agreed. "I can handle men like that." "I know you can." He wrapped his hands around the cup. "I just didn't want to watch you have to." She stood there for a moment, holding the coffee pot with no particular expression on her face. Then she went back behind the counter, and neither one of them said anything more about it. What Abigail did not know, what nobody in Willow Creek knew, was who Nathaniel Carter actually was. Not Nate. Not the trail hand sleeping in the bunkhouse over at the Deacon Spread, earning a seasonal wage and doing work that left his hands torn up by sundown. Not the quiet man who ate cornbread at the table by the window and minded his own business. Nathaniel Hayes Carter, age 35, owner of the Carter Ranch, 43,000 acres in the Carson River Valley, 1,800 head of cattle, and the largest privately held water rights in the eastern county. His name appeared on 3 different bank charters and a land deed that stretched from the foothills all the way to the river bend. Men in 3 counties knew that name. Women in 3 counties had made their interest in that name abundantly clear. That was, in fact, the problem. It had started about 3 years back, after the death of his father left Nathaniel holding the full weight of the Carter legacy, and a ranch that ran so smoothly, he sometimes went days without anything particular needing his attention. The ranch hands knew their work. The foreman, a steady man named Briggs, kept the operations tight. The cattle were fat, and the water was clean, and the money came in every season as regular as rain. And Nathaniel had sat in the big house on the hill, and slowly understood that he was one of the loneliest men in the territory. Women came. He was not so blind that he didn't see the pattern. They came to the church socials, and the ranch dances, and the county fairs, and they looked at him with a particular kind of attention that had nothing to do with who he was, and everything to do with what he owned. They spoke to him in soft voices and laughed at things he hadn't meant to be funny, and looked at the big house on the hill with a hunger that made him tired down to his bones. He had tried. He was not a man who gave up easily. He had courted 2 women in 3 years. The first one had lasted 6 months before he caught her showing a photograph of the ranch house to her mother with the caption, "Our future home." The second had lasted 4 months before she started referring to the ranch as "when it's ours" in front of his ranch hands. He had ended both, quietly, cleanly, without drama. And then he had sat on the porch of the big house on the hill and thought for a long time about what exactly he was doing wrong. The answer, he eventually concluded, was that he was starting every relationship as Nathaniel Hayes Carter, which meant every woman who stood across from him was already standing in the shadow of the ranch and the money and the name. They couldn't see past it because it was always there, right at the front of everything, casting its long shadow over any chance of something real. So he'd had an idea. A simple one. Perhaps a foolish one. He wasn't entirely certain which. He had packed a single bag, told Briggs he was taking some time away on personal business, and ridden west until he crossed the county line. No Carter name. No ranch. No big house. Just a man named Nate, looking for seasonal work on the cattle trail, sleeping in bunkhouses, eating at roadside kitchens. He had not planned for any particular outcome. He had not come looking for a wife or a woman or anything beyond the plain desire to exist for a while as just a person. He had not planned on Abigail Whitmore. The thing about Abigail was that she treated him exactly the way she treated everyone else. That sounds simple. It was not simple. It was, in Nathaniel's experience, nearly impossible to find. Everyone who knew what he owned treated him differently, with deference or calculation, or a particular kind of performance designed to appeal to what they imagined he wanted. The men on the Carter ranch respected him because he paid their wages and kept the water running. The women at the county socials looked at him like a prize at a shooting competition. Abigail looked at him like a man who was hungry and needed feeding. She poured his coffee without ceremony. She gave him extra cornbread without making a show of the generosity. She told him plainly when she was out of something and offered him the alternative without apology. When he finished eating and paid his bill, she said, "Thank you," the same way she said it to the ranch hand, sitting 2 tables over the traveling merchant at the corner, and old Pete Granger, who'd been coming in since before Abigail was old enough to reach the stove. There was no performance in her, no calculation he could detect. There was just her. And the longer he sat at the table by the window, the more he wanted to understand how a woman who had clearly been handed every reason to become hard and cold and armored had instead remained open, present, like someone who had decided in full knowledge of the cost that kindness was still worth the price. He had started paying attention to things he hadn't noticed at first. The way she quietly slipped an extra portion onto the plate of the young boy, whose father paid in half coins, and looked at the floor when he did it. The way she kept a pot of plain broth on the back of the stove, not on the board, never mentioned, just there for the old Navajo woman who came in once a week with nothing in her pockets. The way she swept her front step every single morning before opening, not because anyone noticed, but because she had clearly decided it was worth doing. The town of Willow Creek, for its part, continued to have opinions. He overheard them when he was walking back from the deacon spread in the evenings. In the general store at the trough outside the church on Sundays. Poor thing. She'd be pretty enough if she wasn't so well. A woman that size is never going to find a good man, not out here. She's got a kind heart, I'll grant her that. But kindness doesn't warm a bed. Her mother was the same way. Good cook. Died alone. The last one had come from a woman outside the milliner's shop, said with a kind of satisfied certainty, and Nathaniel had stopped walking and stood very still for a moment until the tightness across his chest passed. He did not understand yet what it meant that the words made him angry. I thought he did. He thought it was simply the general human response to watching injustice spoken out loud. He had spent years hearing men say cruel things about people who couldn't afford to respond, and it always produced the same reaction in him, a flat, cold anger, the kind that didn't burn, but settled. He thought it was that. He was wrong. The moment he understood he was wrong came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after he first walked through Abigail's door. He had come in late, past 2 o'clock, after the noon rush had long cleared. She was alone in the kitchen, sitting at one of the tables with her recipe book open, a pencil behind her ear, and a cup of cold coffee she'd clearly forgotten to drink. She was working on something, writing in the margins, crossing things out, writing again. She didn't hear him come in. He stood in the doorway for a moment without announcing himself. Not because he meant to watch her without her knowing, but because the sight of her settled and focused and entirely herself in this space she had built with her own hands stopped him mid-step in a way he hadn't expected. She had her hair down. He hadn't seen it down before. It fell past her shoulders, dark chestnut with something close to red in it, where the afternoon light caught it, and she had one hand up, absently pushing a strand of it back from her face, while she studied whatever she was writing. She looked at peace. More at peace than anyone he'd seen in a long time. Not happy exactly. Not performing happiness. Just present and calm, and entirely unafraid of her own company. Something shifted in Nathaniel Carter's chest. Something that had been carefully locked and sensibly stored, moved without permission, and he understood in the same moment that it moved that it was not going to move back. He cleared his throat. She looked up, startled, and the pencil fell off her ear. She grabbed it before it hit the floor, a little flustered, and then straightened and gave him the same practical look she gave everyone. "You're late for lunch." "I know it. Ran long at the Deacon place." "I've got beef stew from this morning. It's better now than it was at noon, truth be told." "I'll take it." She got up and went behind the counter, moving with that particular unhurried efficiency, and he sat down at his usual table and watched her work without trying to pretend he wasn't. She brought the stew. She brought the coffee. She started to turn away. "Abby." She paused, looked at him. He hadn't intended to say anything. He wasn't sure even now what he intended to say. but the words came out before he could properly organize them. "Who taught you to cook?" She tilted her head slightly. "My mother." She must have been something. Abigail was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down, not at his table, but at the one next to it, turning her chair slightly toward him, in the way of a woman who was allowing a conversation without fully committing to one. "She was," Abigail said. "She came to Willow Creek with my father when I was 2. He left when I was 7. She never stopped cooking," she said. She stopped, smiled slightly, looking down at the table. "She said that as long as you could feed somebody, you had something to offer the world." She was right. Abigail looked up at him. "She was right," he said again simply, without any particular expression, except the one that meant he meant it. Something moved in Abigail's face. Small. Almost imperceptible. The kind of thing a person does when they hear something they had stopped expecting to hear. She looked away first. "Finish your stew before it goes cold again," she said, standing. "I've got bread in the oven." But she was smiling when she went back behind the counter. And she didn't know that he saw it. And she couldn't have known that the sight of it was the single most disorienting thing that had happened to Nathaniel Carter in a very long time. He came back every day. He helped her when she'd let him. She was stubborn about it. At first didn't need help. Thank you had been doing this herself for years. But he noticed that the water barrel needed refilling and filled it before she asked. He noticed that the back step was rotting through and came back on a Saturday with boards and nails and fixed it without making any announcement about doing so. She came out the back door that afternoon and stood looking at the fresh wood for a long moment. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Somebody was going to break their ankle on it. I was going to get to it. Now you don't have to." She looked at him. The sun was behind him, and she had to put her hand up to shade her eyes, which meant he couldn't quite read her expression. But her voice when she spoke was softer than usual. "Thank you, Nate." "Yes, ma'am." She went back inside. He gathered his tools, and he thought with a clarity that was almost painful that he could not remember the last time doing a simple thing for someone had felt like this. Like it mattered. Like it was the right use of an afternoon. He thought about the big house on the hill, the ranch hands who did everything before he could think to ask, the bank accounts that solved problems before they became problems, the life he had built that ran so smoothly it had stopped needing him in any meaningful way. He thought about Abigail, who ran this kitchen alone, who fixed every problem herself when it needed fixing and asked for nothing, and built something not large, not powerful, not particularly impressive by any standard. The world used to measure things but hers. Real and hers, and warm. He did not let himself finish the thought. Not yet. Willow Creek noticed because Willow Creek noticed everything. By the end of the 3rd week, people had opinions about the fact that the trail hand from the Deacon spread was spending time at Abby Whitmore's kitchen in ways that went beyond the ordinary appetite for salt pork and cornbread. Clara Hatch mentioned it to her sister at the dressmaker's. The sister mentioned it to the minister's wife. The minister's wife mentioned it to her husband, who mentioned it from the pulpit in a roundabout way that left no one in any doubt about who he meant. And on a Wednesday morning, when Abigail was walking from the general store back to her kitchen with a sack of flour over one shoulder, 3 women fell into step around her in the particular way that meant they had orchestrated the encounter in advance. "Abby," said Clara Hatch pleasantly, "we've been meaning to have a word." Abigail adjusted the flour sack. "Morning, Clara. It's about that cow hand you've got hanging around your place." Clara's tone was careful, concerned. The tone of a woman delivering bad news for someone else's benefit. "We only bring it up because we care about you." "Of course," Abigail said. "A man like that." Clara glanced at the other 2 women who nodded encouragingly. "Well, he's a drifter, Abby. He doesn't have land. He doesn't have standing. He's going to move on when the season changes, same as the rest of them." "I appreciate the concern," Abigail said. "We just think, and I say this with nothing but kindness, that you shouldn't let yourself get carried away. It isn't as though—" Clara paused delicately. "Well, a man has options, Abby, even a trail hand. And a woman in your situation needs to be realistic about—" "My situation," Abigail said. "Your—" Clara's hands made a small gesture that encompassed everything without saying any of it. Abigail stopped walking. She shifted the flour sack to her other shoulder and looked at Clara Hatch with an expression that was entirely calm. "Clara," she said, "I have been hearing variations of this conversation my entire life, and I want you to know that I understand what you're trying to do, and I know you believe you mean well." She paused. "And I want you to also know that I am not waiting around for someone to have mercy on me. I am not in a situation that requires your pity or your management. He is a customer who has been kind to me. That is all. And if it were anything more than that, it would still not be your business." She shifted the flour sack again, nodded to the three of them, and walked on. Behind her, she heard Clara say to the other two, "Well, I tried." Abigail kept walking, and if her eyes stung a little in the bright summer morning, she told herself it was the dust. Because Clara Hatch, infuriating as she was not entirely wrong. Men passed through. That was the truth of it. Men came through Willow Creek on the trail, and they ate Abigail's food, and some of them were kind to her, and some of them weren't, and all of them eventually kept moving. Because the trail went east, and the seasons changed, and nobody was staying in Willow Creek who didn't have a reason to stay. Nate had no reason to stay. She knew that. She had known it from the first morning when he sat down at the table by the window and wrapped his hands around that coffee cup like a man warming himself at a fire he knew would eventually go out. She had known it. She just hadn't quite managed to not care. That evening, after she had closed the kitchen and washed the last of the plates and sat down at her own table in the back with a cup of real tea and the silence she usually found restoring that evening, someone knocked at her kitchen door. She opened it. Nate stood on the back step, the new step, the one he'd repaired, with his hat in his hand, and something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Something less guarded than usual. "I saw you come home earlier," he said. "You looked—" He stopped. "Are you all right?" She leaned her shoulder against the doorframe. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine, Nate. You look like somebody said something that shouldn't have been said." She studied him for a moment. The setting sun behind him had gone amber and long-shadowed the way it did in summer evenings out here when the heat broke. He was still in his work clothes, hat in hand, and there was dried trail dust on his boots, and he stood there on her back step with the particular stillness of a man who was not going to leave until he knew she was all right. She didn't know what to do with that. "Clara Hatch told me to be realistic," Abigail said finally. "About what?" She looked at him. "About men who pass through." A silence. "Abby." "She's not wrong," Abigail said, her voice entirely level. "I know that. I've always known that. I'm not asking you for anything, Nate, and I'm not expecting anything. You've been kind to me, and I'm grateful for it, and when the season ends, you'll move on same as everyone does, and that's—" "Abby." His voice was quiet. "Stop." She stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, something complicated and deliberate, and a little afraid. The expression of a man standing at the edge of saying something he cannot unsay. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She opened her mouth. "Not yet," he said. I need some time to explain something to you, something I should have said before now." He paused. "Will you let me explain it? Not tonight, but soon." She looked at him. At the hat in his hands, turning slowly by the brim. At the set of his jaw, and the steadiness of his eyes, and the way he was standing on her back step, like a man who had made a decision and intended to stand by it. "All right," she said finally. He nodded, put his hat on. "Thank you." He walked back across her yard toward the trail east, and she watched him go, and she stood there long after he'd disappeared into the amber evening, with her hand on the doorframe, and something in her chest that felt like a warning she'd already decided not to listen to. He had said soon. Abigail spent the next 2 days telling herself it didn't mean anything. She had a kitchen to run. She had cornbread to make, and coffee to keep hot, and a broken hinge on the supply cabinet that she'd been meaning to fix for a month. She had work which had always been the most reliable cure for the particular kind of foolishness that came from letting a man stand on your back step with his hat in his hands and look at you like you were something worth looking at. Work. That was what she had. That was what had always been enough. She told herself this on Friday morning while grinding the coffee. She told herself this on Friday afternoon while pulling bread from the oven. She told herself this on Friday evening while washing the last of the dishes in water that had gone cold, and the kitchen was quiet, and the trail outside had emptied out for the night, and Nate had not come in at all that day. She set the last dish on the rack and dried her hands and sat down at her table and did not think about it. She thought about it constantly. He came in Saturday morning before she had finished setting up. She heard the front door and called out without turning, "We don't open until 7. "I know," he said. "I brought something." She turned. He was standing just inside the door with his hat in one hand and a cloth-wrapped bundle in the other, the size of a small loaf. He held it out with the same directness he brought to everything, no ceremony, no performance. "What is that?" she asked. "Peaches, from the deacon's orchard. He said to take what I wanted for the week, and I figured—" He stopped. "Set the bundle on the nearest table. You mentioned your mother used to make peach preserves." Abigail stared at the bundle, then at him. "I mentioned that once, 3 weeks ago." "I know." "You remembered?" "Yes." He said it simply without making anything of it. She crossed the room and unwrapped the cloth. 6 peaches ripe and heavy, the kind that smelled like the best part of summer. She stood there looking at them and felt something move in her chest that she had no immediate plan for. "Nate," she said, "you don't have to do anything with them right now." "That's not what I was going to say." She looked up at him. "I was going to say thank you." He nodded once. Then he sat down at his table, and she went behind the counter, and they fell into the easy rhythm of a Saturday morning that had, without either of them deciding it, become something they both expected. She poured his coffee. He wrapped his hands around the cup. She put the peaches carefully on the shelf behind the counter. Outside, Willow Creek was starting to stir. Neither of them noticed. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday in the form of a man named Douglas Hale. He came in at noon with 2 other men dressed well enough to make the lunch crowd take notice, and he took the best table in the room, the way a man takes something he has already decided is his. He was broad-shouldered, somewhere around 50, with the particular confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Abigail brought menus. He looked at her once, the fast, comprehensive look of a man filing information, and then looked away. "What's your special, beef stew with roasted potatoes, cornbread on the side. Bring 3. He didn't look up again. "And keep the coffee coming." She brought the food. He and his men ate and talked among themselves low enough that she couldn't make out the words. Business talk by the sound of it. She refilled the coffee twice without being asked, which was her habit, and the third time she came to the table, the man named Hale caught her wrist as she reached for his cup. Not hard, not rough, but firmly enough that she had to stop moving. "Hold on," he said. "Sit down a minute." She looked at his hand on her wrist. "Sir, I have other customers." "This won't take long." He released her but didn't shift back from the table. "I've been looking at this piece of land for about 6 months. Corner lot, south edge of town, right off the cattle trail. I've had my attorney looking into the deed." He watched her face. "You know who owns it?" "I do," Abigail said. "You own the building too." "My mother left it to me." Hale nodded slowly. "Here's the thing, Miss Whitmore. Miss Whitmore, I'm expanding my operation east, and I need access to this trail. The position of this lot is, well, it's significant. I'd like to make you an offer." Abigail looked at him. "This kitchen isn't for sale." "Everything's for sale at the right number." He smiled. The kind of smile that had probably worked on a lot of people. "Hear the number before you say no." "Mr. Hale," she said, "I grew up in this kitchen. My mother built it from nothing. The number doesn't matter." The smile stayed in place, but something behind it cooled. "Miss Whitmore, be reasonable. You're a young woman running a one-woman operation on a cattle trail. There's a ceiling on what something like this can become. I'm offering you a real future." "I already have one," she said. "Enjoy your stew." She walked back to the counter without hurrying, and she did not let her hands shake until she was out of his line of sight. She heard Hale say something to his men, low and dismissive. She did not look back. She was filling the breadbasket for the next table when she became aware that Nate had come in sometime during the exchange she hadn't noticed when, and was sitting at his usual table. And he was watching Douglas Hale with the particular quality of stillness she had learned to read as controlled anger. When Hale and his men rose to leave, Hale stopped at the door and looked back at Abigail. "I'll be in town through the end of the month," he said. "Offer stands. Think about it." The door closed. Nate's coffee cup was on the table, untouched, still full. Abigail came to refill it anyway. He looked up at her. His jaw was tight. "Who is he?" Nate asked. "Says he wants to buy the kitchen." "What did you tell him?" "That it isn't for sale." She refilled the cup. "Same thing I'll tell him next time." Nate was quiet for a moment. "Do you know who Douglas Hale is?" She looked at him. Something in his tone had changed. "Should I?" He picked up the cup, set it down. "He owns most of the commercial corridor in Carson County. Bought out 3 family operations last year, the Brennan Mill, the Taggart General Store, the old ferry crossing. People said it wasn't for sale. They all eventually sold." Abigail felt a chill move through her that she kept carefully off her face. "How do you know that?" And there it was, the small, almost invisible hesitation. So quick she would have missed it if she hadn't been watching him as closely as she'd been watching him for weeks. "I've worked a lot of territory," he said. "You hear things." She held his gaze for one beat longer than usual. Then she nodded and went back to her work. But she thought about that hesitation for the rest of the day. That afternoon, she had a visit from a different kind of trouble entirely. Margaret Soules, who ran the boarding house on the north end of Main Street, and was by general town consensus the most reliable source of information about everyone's private business, came in at 3 o'clock with the specific energy of a woman on a mission. She sat down across from Abigail, who was doing her afternoon accounts at the back table, and folded her hands and said without preamble, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "I'm always honest," Abigail said without looking up from the ledger. "Are you in any kind of arrangement with that cowhand from the Deacon spread?" Abigail set down her pencil. "Margaret, I'm asking because I care about you, Abby. I want that understood." "I understand it. Because there are people saying things. And what people are saying is that you and that man have gotten friendly in a way that isn't proper for an unmarried woman, and what people are saying," Abigail said, "is that a man has been kind to me, and that's somehow more suspicious than the men who come in here and say terrible things to my face." She looked at Margaret directly. "He fixed my backstep. He defended my dignity in my own kitchen when 3 strangers decided it was open season. He brings me peaches, and he eats his meals, and he does not ask me for a single thing. If that's the scandal, then I'm afraid Willow Creek is going to have to find something more interesting to talk about." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "He's a drifter, Abby. You've said that. He'll be gone by fall." "I know that. Then nothing." Abigail picked her pencil back up. "I'm not a fool, Margaret. I'm not building plans on a man who hasn't asked me to. I'm just—" She stopped, looked at the ledger without seeing it. "I'm just not going to pretend he isn't kind to me, because nobody in this town has ever thought that kindness aimed at me was worth mentioning before, and I don't see why I should apologize for noticing it now." Margaret looked at her for a long time. Something in her expression shifted away from the mission energy and towards something quieter, older, a little sad. "No," she said finally softly. "I don't suppose you should." She left without ordering anything. Abigail stared at the ledger for a while after she'd gone. Then she picked up her pencil and went back to the numbers. That evening, the first real fight happened. It was not planned. Like most real things, it arrived without announcement. Nate came by at closing time, as he'd taken to doing when he worked a late shift at the Deacon place, not to come inside, just to walk her the 100 yards to the small house behind the kitchen where she lived, a habit that had begun 3 weeks ago, and that neither of them had formally acknowledged as a habit. She was locking the front door when she turned and said, without having planned to say it, "Who are you?" He stopped. "What?" I've been thinking about it all day. She kept her voice even, level. The voice she used when she was trying not to show that something had gotten under her skin. You know things that a seasonal hand on a cattle trail doesn't know. You speak differently than you think you're speaking. You sit in my kitchen and watch Douglas Hale like you recognize him, and then you tell me you just hear things. She looked at him. Who are you, Nate? A silence. Not the easy silence they'd built between them. Something heavier. Abby. Don't. She shook her head. Don't say my name first, and then tell me something that isn't the truth. I'm too tired for that. He looked at her for a long moment. The moon was up half full, and there was enough light to see his face. He was working through something. She could see it, the particular internal labor of a person deciding how much to say, and in which direction. I'm not who I said I was, he said finally. Quiet. Careful. Not entirely. Her stomach tightened. What does that mean? It means I'm not a drifter. It means the Deacon place was a place to work while I was out here, and being out here wasn't... He stopped, took his hat off, held it. It wasn't an accident. You came here on purpose. I came to this area on purpose. You were... Something crossed his face. You were not part of any plan. She studied him. Then what was the plan? The plan, he said with a flatness that sounded like self-contempt, was to exist somewhere that nobody knew my name. To find out if I could be just a person for a while without everything else. He paused. I haven't lied to you. Not directly. But I left things out that you would have wanted to know, and I... He stopped again. I'm not proud of that. She stood very still. The night air around them was warm, and the cicadas were doing their evening work, and somewhere down Main Street, a door banged. What things? She asked. He opened his mouth. Abby. A voice from across the street. Jimmy Teal, who ran the livery stable and had the unfortunate habit of appearing at inconvenient moments. Saw your light was still on. You doing all right? Nate closed his mouth. Abigail looked across the street at Jimmy and back at Nate. The moment the exact quality of the thing that had been about to happen was gone. Dissolved into the ordinary noise of a Tuesday night in Willow Creek. Fine, Jimmy, she called back. Heading in now. She looked at Nate. He was watching her with that controlled expression. The one she had learned was not blankness, but containment, a man holding more than he was showing. Tomorrow, she said. He nodded. I mean it, Nate. I know you do. He put his hat back on. I'll be here. She went inside. She did not sleep well. He came in the next morning before she opened, and for the second time in a week, she turned around to find him standing just inside her door with his hat in his hand. But this time, there were no peaches. This time, there was nothing in his hands at all, and nothing in his expression, except the particular look of a man who has decided that the only way through something is directly through it. Sit down, she said. He sat. She poured 2 cups of coffee and brought them both to the table and sat across from him. The kitchen was quiet, and early light came in sideways through the east window, and outside, Willow Creek had not started yet. Tell me, she said. He wrapped his hands around the cup, looked at it, then looked at her. My name is Nathaniel Hayes Carter, he said. I own the Carter Ranch in the Carson River Valley, 43,000 acres, 1,800 cattle water rights from the foothills to the river bend. He said it flat, reciting something unpleasant that has to be recited. I am by most county standards one of the wealthiest men in this part of the territory. The kitchen was very quiet. Abigail looked at him without moving. My father died 3 years ago, he continued. Left me the ranch, left me everything, and I... He stopped. I had everything. I had more than most men see in a lifetime. And I was sitting in a house by myself on 43,000 acres, and I could not for the life of me figure out if a single person in my life actually gave a damn about me, or just about what they could get standing next to me. He looked down at the cup. So I left. I packed a bag, and I told my foreman I'd be back, and I rode west, and I worked wherever somebody would have me, and I stopped performing. Stopped being Nathaniel Carter. I just... He exhaled. I wanted to know what it felt like to be nobody for a while. Abigail's hands were around her own cup. She had not moved. How long? She asked. 4 months, since April. And you were going to tell me. I was always going to tell you. His voice tightened. That is the truth, Abby. I don't know when. I don't know what I was afraid of exactly. That you'd look at me differently. That everything would change. That you'd... He stopped. His jaw tightened. That you'd decide the man you were talking to didn't exist. Silence. Abigail looked at him. She looked at him for a long time, at the worn vest and the roughed-up hands and the face that had started to relax in her kitchen over the past weeks, slowly, the way a person relaxes when they've stopped performing. At the hat on the table turning by the brim. She said very carefully, "Does Douglas Hale know who you are?" Something shifted in Nate's expression. "Yes." "Is that why you recognized him?" "Yes." "Did you know he was going to approach me about the land?" "No." His voice was firm. "I didn't know he was in Willow Creek until I saw him in your kitchen. If I had known—" He stopped. "I would have said something." She looked down at her coffee. The morning light had moved, gone gold and ordinary, and outside she could hear the first sounds of the town starting up. "Abigail," he said. Her full name. He'd never used it before. She looked up. "I know I don't have the right to ask you anything right now," he said. "I know that. But I need you to know that nothing I said to you in this kitchen was a performance. Not one word. Not one morning. When I sat at that table and ate your food and talked to you, that was—" He stopped. "That was the most honest I've been with another person in 3 years." She said nothing. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today," he said. I need you to know that." A long pause. She stood up, picked up her cup, walked to the counter and set it down, and stood there with her back to him, and he did not speak, and the kitchen was very quiet. "My mother told me something once," she said finally, to the counter, to the coffee pot, to the wall. She said that the loneliest kind of person was one who'd been made to feel like their real self wasn't worth knowing. She paused. I thought she was talking about me. I think now she might have been talking about everyone. She heard him behind her, the small sound of him standing. "Abby, you should go." She turned. Her voice was controlled, and her face was controlled, and she was very deliberately not letting any of the complicated storm in her chest appear on either. "I need to open in an hour, and I need to think." He looked at her. He put his hat on. "I'll be at the Deacon place," he said. "Same as every day." "I know where you'll be." He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame, didn't turn around. "Everything she made felt like home," he said quietly. "Your mother was right about that. I didn't know what it felt like to eat a meal that felt like home until I sat down in this kitchen." He paused. "I should have told you from the start that I was sorry, that you changed something in me that I didn't know was broken." He walked out. The door fell shut behind him gently, the way careful people close doors. Abigail stood behind her counter in her mother's kitchen for a long time. The bread was in the oven. The coffee was hot. In an hour, the door would open and the day would begin, and she would move through it the way she moved through every day, steadily, practically, without making a show of any of it. She took a breath. She put her apron on. She went to check on the bread. But her hands, pressing flat on the warm top of the oven door, were trembling slightly, and this time it wasn't from anger, and she knew it, and that knowledge was the most frightening thing that had happened to her in a very long time. Douglas Hale came back on Thursday. He came in at noon again, same table, same companions, and this time he was prepared. He had a paper with him, folded formal, that he set on the table beside his coffee cup, in a way that made it visible without being offered. "Miss Whitmore," he said when she brought his food. "I've had a number think on our conversation. I'd like to adjust the offer." "I haven't changed my answer," Abigail said. "I'm tripling it." He tapped the paper. "Land value plus full replacement cost for the building, plus operating cost for the next 2 years. You could start fresh anywhere. Buy something twice this size." Abigail set his plate down. "Mr. Hale, if you triple nothing, it's still nothing." One of his companions made a sound of surprise. Hale's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "You'd be smart to read the offer before you dismiss it," he said with the first edge she'd heard from him. "And you'd be smart to find a different piece of land." She straightened. "This one isn't available." She turned to go. He said quietly in the tone a man uses when he's stopped being polite. "I've purchased land from people who said that before, Miss Whitmore. I'm patient." She looked back at him. "Then you'll have a long wait." She walked away. She heard him say something to his companions, low and cold, and the word inevitable reached her through the noise of the lunch crowd. She kept walking. She didn't realize until she was behind the counter that her whole body had gone cold with a fear she hadn't let herself feel while he was looking at her. Because she knew what men like Hale meant when they said patient. She had heard her mother talk about the Brennan family who'd owned the mill before the cash ran out and the pressure got relentless, and eventually the weight of fighting an inevitable thing became too heavy to keep lifting. She was one woman, one kitchen. The deed was solid, but deeds needed lawyers to defend them, and lawyers needed money, and money was the one thing she did not have an abundance of. She stood at her counter and looked out at the noon lunch crowd and thought for the first time that she might be in real trouble. That evening when Nate appeared at her door, she almost told him. She stopped herself, because she could see with a clarity that was almost painful how that would look, how it would feel. The wealthy ranch owner stepping in to save the poor woman's kitchen from the land-grabbing businessman. The rich man's money solving the problem that his presence had probably made worse, since Hale had to know by now, or would know eventually, that Nathaniel Carter was eating breakfast at Abby Whitmore's table. She was not going to be someone's rescue story. She looked at Nate through the screen door. He had his hat in his hand and the beginning of a question on his face. "I'm all right," she said before he could ask. He looked at her steadily. "You're not." "I will be." She put her hand on the doorframe. "Nate, I'm still thinking about what you told me. I need a little more time." He absorbed this. "All right. Don't come in tomorrow morning. I'll let you know when I'm ready." Something in his face tightened. "Is this about Hale?" She paused, just a fraction too long. "Abby." His voice dropped. "What did he say?" "He made another offer." "Did he threaten you?" "Not in words." Nate's jaw set. No." The word came out harder than she meant it. She softened it slightly. "No, Nate, I mean it. Whatever you can do, I don't want it. Not like that. I'm not going to just, I know you're not. I know that." She looked at him. The screen between them made his face slightly indistinct in the evening light, and she was almost glad of it because it made it easier to say what she had to say. "But I've been running this kitchen on my own for 6 years. I've had men try to talk over me and around me and through me for 6 years. And I have never once let anyone solve my problems for me. That's not pride." She paused. "That's the only self-respect I've got." A long silence. "All right," he said. Quiet, controlled. The voice of a man overriding every instinct he had deliberately. "All right, but if he comes back and it's not just words, I'll tell you. Promise me that." She met his eyes through the screen. "I promise." He put his hat on. Looked at her for one more moment with an expression she couldn't quite name and didn't try to. "Good night, Abby." "Good night, Nate." She watched him walk away across the dark yard, and she stood at the door until she couldn't hear his footsteps anymore. Then she went inside, sat down at her table, and looked at the recipe book her mother had left her. The grease-stained pages, the notes in the margins, the years of accumulated knowledge of how to make something from very little and make it taste like more. She was not going to lose this kitchen. She didn't know yet how she was going to keep it. But she knew one thing, sitting at that table in the quiet of her mother's kitchen, with the night pressing in, warm and close around her. Whatever happened next, it was going to be her decision. Made by her. For her. On her own terms. She opened the recipe book and picked up her pencil. And she started to plan. She spent 3 days planning before Douglas Hale made his next move. She had the recipe book open every night, working through numbers the way her mother had taught her, methodically, without flinching from what they said. The kitchen was profitable. Modestly, consistently profitable. Not the kind of profitable that built empires, but the kind that kept a woman fed, and the roof sound, and the stove burning through winter. She had savings. Not enough to hire a lawyer if it came to a real legal fight, but enough to buy time. Time was what she needed. She had written 3 letters. One to the county land office in Carson City, requesting a copy of the original deed documentation. One to a woman named Ruth Hensley in Millbrook, who had been her mother's closest friend, and whose husband had been a clerk in the county recorder's office before he died. And one to a lawyer in Reno, whose name had appeared in an advertisement in the back of a newspaper someone had left in the kitchen 4 months ago, which she had torn out and kept in the recipe book without quite knowing why. She sent all 3 letters on Friday morning before she opened the kitchen. She told no one. Not Margaret Soules, not old Pete Granger, not Nate, especially not Nate. She had kept that promise to herself through 3 long days of not letting him come in early, of serving his meals with the same steady hands and the same steady face she brought to everything, of answering his careful questions with careful answers that told him nothing beyond what she chose to share. He watched her with the particular attention of a man who knows he is being kept at a distance and is choosing deliberately to respect it. She noticed that too. She noticed everything about him, which was the problem. The plan she had made in the quiet of her mother's kitchen held for exactly 9 days. Then, on a Saturday morning, Hale came back. He didn't come at noon this time. He came at 7:30, when the kitchen had just opened, and the first customers of the day were settling in with their coffee. He came alone, which was worse than when he brought his men, because a man who comes alone has already decided something. He sat at the table by the window. Nate's table. Abigail noted this and said nothing about it. She brought him coffee. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, not hostile, not warm, somewhere in the careful middle where men stood when they were about to say something they had rehearsed. "I've had my attorney draw up a formal offer," he said. "It's better than what I told you before, substantially better. Mr. Hale, there's also something else." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded document thicker than the one from before. "My attorney pulled the deed history on this property. There's a lien attached from 1871 that your mother secured against the building for a loan from the Territorial Bank of Carson City." He set the document on the table face up so she could see the official stamps across the top. "That bank was acquired by a holding company in 1874. The holding company has since been purchased by—" He paused. "Let her wait. "By an entity that I have a controlling interest in," he finished. The kitchen noise continued around them. Plates, coffee cups, the sound of someone pushing back a chair. Normal morning sounds that felt suddenly very far away. Abigail looked at the document. She did not pick it up. "The lien was cleared," she said carefully. "My mother paid it." "Your mother made payments against it," Hale said. 3 years of payments, and then she died, and the payments stopped, and the outstanding balance plus 4 years of accumulated interest was never resolved." He folded his hands on the table. "I'm not here to foreclose, Miss Whitmore. I want you to understand that. I'm here to offer you a way out that leaves you with something. A clean sale, fair price, and I absorb the lien. You walk away free and clear." The room had not changed. The same customers, the same noise, the same morning. But Abigail felt the floor beneath her do something subtle and terrible. A small but unmistakable shift, the way ground feels in the moment before it stops being reliable. She kept her face entirely still. "I'll need to see the documentation," she said. "The original loan papers, the payment records. Of course." Hale's tone was magnanimous, the tone of a man who has already won and is being gracious about it. "My attorney will have everything available. Take your time." He stood, finished his coffee, left 2 coins on the table, the exact cost, not a penny more, and walked out. Abigail stood at that table for a count of 10 after the door closed. Then she walked behind her counter, picked up her order pad, went to the next table, and asked the Lundgren brothers what they were having this morning. She did not let herself fall apart until the kitchen closed at 2 o'clock. She was sitting at her back table with all the papers she had deed her mother's payment ledger, the handful of receipts she'd found in an old tin box under the floorboard, spread across the table in front of her, when the knock came at the back door. She already knew who it was. She sat there for a moment, looking at the papers. Then she got up and opened the door. Nate was on the step. He looked at her face, and the careful, composed mask she had been wearing all day slipped just slightly around the edges. She felt it slip and couldn't stop it. "Hale came back," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Tell me." She stepped back from the door. He came in without being invited the first time he had done that, and she didn't mind it, which told her more about the state she was in than almost anything else could have. She told him. She kept her voice flat and factual. The lien, the holding company, the accumulated interest, the offer that wasn't quite an ultimatum, but had the shape of one. When she finished, Nate was standing at the end of her table with his hat in his hand, looking at the papers she'd laid out. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved across the documents with the careful efficiency of someone who knew how to read them. She watched him read them. "How much is outstanding?" he asked. "I don't know exactly. He didn't give me a number. His attorney is supposed to produce the full documentation." "Can I?" He started to reach for the payment ledger, stopped. "May I look at this?" She nodded. He picked up the ledger, turned pages. His expression didn't change, but she could see him working through the numbers and something about the fluency of it. The ease with which he moved through financial documentation confirmed what she had already understood about who he was. He set the ledger down. "Your mother paid consistently for 29 months, he said. "The remaining balance with interest at the standard territorial rate from 1873 to now is probably somewhere between $400 and $600, depending on what rate the holding company applied." Abigail looked at him. "That's a lot of money," she said, carefully. "Yes." "More than I have." "Yes." Silence. She could hear it coming. The offer she'd told herself she didn't want approaching from the direction she'd known it would come from. She braced for it the way a person braces for cold water. "Abby," he said. "Don't," she said. He stopped. "Whatever you're about to say, don't." She kept her voice level. "I know what you can do. I know how easily you could fix this. And I am telling you right now, Nathaniel, that if you write a check and hand it to Douglas Hale, I will never—" She stopped, took a breath. "I will never be able to look at this kitchen again without seeing your name on it. And this kitchen has my mother's name on it. Do you understand?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I understand," he said. "Good. But I need you to listen to me for 60 seconds. She looked at him, gave him 60 seconds with her eyes. "I'm not talking about paying your debt," he said. "I'm talking about the holding company. The entity Hale says he has a controlling interest in. I know that company. I know who else holds shares in it. And if Hale has misrepresented his position in any way—" He paused. "There are legal levers here that have nothing to do with money, that have to do with how he acquired that interest and whether the original lien terms were properly transferred. That's not me saving you. That's information. What you do with it is yours." She looked at him. "You can verify all of this independently," he said, "with the letter you wrote to Carson City." She went still. "I didn't tell you about that letter." "You didn't have to." Something like a quiet, careful, almost smile. "You're the most practical person I have ever met. Of course you wrote to Carson City." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away out the window at the ordinary late afternoon. "The lien transfer might not be clean," she said slowly. "It might not be. If the original terms weren't met during acquisition, then the lien doesn't transfer as an executable claim," he said. "Hale may have purchased paper he can't actually use against you." Silence. Abigail looked at the papers spread across her table. At her mother's handwriting in the ledger, careful, deliberate, the writing of a woman who knew that every number mattered. At the deed with its stamps and signatures. At everything her mother had held on to through hard winters and harder men, and the long grinding work of building something from nothing. "How do I find out?" she asked. Your Carson City contact should be able to tell you who actually holds the lien and under what terms. If you want, and only if you want, I can tell you the name of a lawyer in Reno who handles territorial land disputes. He's honest. He won't charge you more than the case is worth." She looked at him. "I already wrote to a lawyer in Reno," she said. The almost smile became something slightly more real. "Of course you did." She took a breath, gathered the papers into a careful pile. "All right," she said. "All right, I'll wait for the responses and see what they say." She looked at him. "But Nate, if it comes to money—" "I know. I mean it. I know you mean it." He held her gaze. "And I'm telling you that I will respect it, whatever you decide." She believed him. That was the part that surprised her. After everything he had told her, the name, the ranch, the 43,000 acres, the entire life he had folded away and hidden in a bag and carried west. She believed him. Not because he'd earned it back completely, not yet, not all of it. But because in this moment he was standing in her kitchen and not trying to fix her problems, and not turning his money into armor, and not performing the role of the man who saved the day. I was just standing there, waiting. The way a person stands when they've decided the other person gets to lead. "Thank you," she said. He put his hat on. "I'll see you in the morning." "Yes," she said. "You will." The responses came back faster than she expected. Ruth Hensley's letter arrived first, 9 days after Abigail sent hers. Ruth had kept her husband's papers, all of them meticulously organized in cedar boxes. Her daughter had been trying to throw away for years, and she had found among them a copy of the original 1871 loan documentation and a record of the bank's asset transfers through 1876. The Lion Ruth's letter said had been transferred twice, first to the holding company, then in a transaction dated March 1877 to a private land trust operating out of Carson City. Hale had said he had a controlling interest in the holding company. He had said nothing about the land trust. She read that sentence 4 times. The Carson City Land Office responded the following day. The lien, as recorded in the county records, was currently held in the name of the Territorial Land Trust of Nevada, a private entity with no listed principals. Not Douglas Hale. Not his holding company. Not anything with his name attached to it. She sat at her back table with both letters in front of her and read them again carefully to make sure she was understanding them correctly. Then she walked to the front of the kitchen and turned the closed sign around and sat back down. She didn't have time to decide what to do next because 10 minutes later, Hale walked in. He tried the door, found it unlocked despite the sign, and came in with the expression of a man who expected to be received. He had his attorney with him this time, a thin man with a document case, and the tired eyes of someone who spent his life in other people's arguments. "Miss Whitmore." Hale stopped when he saw her face. "I wasn't expecting." "I know you weren't." She stood. She had both letters in her hand. "Sit down, Mr. Hale." Something shifted in his expression. Not alarm, not yet. Reassessment. The look a man gets when he realizes the game has moved without him. He sat. His attorney sat beside him. Abigail set the letters on the table in front of him. She did not sit. "The lion on this property," she said, "was transferred out of your holding company in March of 1877. It is currently registered to the Territorial Land Trust of Nevada, which has no documented connection to you or any entity you've declared an interest in." She looked at him. "Which means that the document you showed me last Saturday was at best incomplete, and at worst, it was a deliberate misrepresentation of your legal standing regarding this property." Hale did not look at the letters. He looked at her. "Where did you get that information?" he said very quietly. "From the county records office, and from a private party with documentation going back to the original transaction." She kept her voice entirely steady. "I also want you to know that I have written to a lawyer in Reno who should be responding any day, and that I intend to forward him copies of everything I have, including the offer documents you brought to this kitchen." She paused. "Including the one where you implied that foreclosure was a possible consequence of not accepting your offer." The attorney put his hand on Hale's arm. Something was communicated in that contact, something wordless and professional. The kind of thing lawyers said to clients with their hands when they wanted them to stop talking. Hale's jaw worked for a moment. "The trust's beneficiary," he said finally, "is a private matter." "I'm sure it is," Abigail said. "But if that beneficiary is you, Mr. Hale, or anyone acting on your behalf, then there are questions about this transaction that a judge might find interesting." She tilted her head. "Wouldn't you say?" Silence. The attorney leaned in and said something into Hale's ear too low to hear. Hale listened with his eyes on Abigail and his jaw still tight and his hands flat on the table. Then he said, "You've had advice." "I've done research," she said. "Someone helped you." "I wrote letters, Mr. Hale. People wrote back." She picked up both letters from the table in front of him. "The information is in the county records. Anyone can find it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked around the kitchen at the plain wooden tables and the oil lamps and the counter her mother had built by hand with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not defeat, not quite. But the first recognition maybe that this was not going to be the easy acquisition he had planned. "I'll have my attorney review the transfer documentation," he said finally. "That sounds like a good idea," she said. He stood. His attorney stood. At the door, Hale paused without turning around. "You're more than I took you for," he said. Not kindly, not unkindly, simply. "Most people are," Abigail said. He left. She stood in the middle of her after the door closed and felt her legs go slightly unsteady for the first time all day. She pulled out the nearest chair and sat down in it and put both letters on the table and breathed. She had done that, herself. With letters and old records and the habit she'd learned from her mother of keeping every piece of paper that might someday matter. She had done that. She told Nate that evening. All of it. The letters, the land trust, the meeting with Hale. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things about him she had come to value most. The quality of his attention was different from most people's fully present. No impatience at the edges. No reaching ahead for the conclusion. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You handled that exactly right," he said. "I didn't want to tell you about it beforehand," she said, "in case it didn't work. I know. I needed it to be mine. I know that too." He looked at her across the table. "Abby, I need to say something to you." She looked at him. "I've been watching you for 2 months." He said it carefully. Not softly carefully, the distinction mattering to him. "I came to this part of the territory to find out who I was when nobody was looking at Nathaniel Carter. And the thing I found out..." He stopped, looked at his hands on the table. "Is that the man I am when nobody is watching Nathaniel Carter, is a man who wants to be sitting at a table in this kitchen, eating food that tastes like a home I never built, talking to someone who treats me like a person worth talking to." He looked up. Not the ranch, not the money, not any of it. This. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Willow Creek was doing its evening things. "You lied to me," she said. Not an accusation, a statement of fact. "I left things out." "That's the same thing, Nathaniel." He absorbed the use of his full name. "Yes," he said. "It is. And I'm still..." She looked at the table. At her mother's recipe book, which she'd left out. At the pencil beside it, the one she always kept tucked behind her ear. "I'm still working out what to do with that." "I know. I'm not angry anymore." She paused. "That's the part that confuses me. I expected to stay angry and I can't seem to keep it going." Something very careful happened in his expression. Like a man who has been holding something tightly for a very long time and is working out whether it might be safe to put it down. "Maybe," he said slowly. "That's because the man who came into your kitchen and fixed your back step and brought you peaches and told your story to no one. Maybe that man wasn't a lie. Maybe that was just what was left when everything else was taken off." She looked at him. He looked back. "Maybe," she said finally. She stood and took her cup to the counter, and he didn't push it further, and she was grateful for that. The evening settled around them, the warm, heavy summer dark, and the kitchen held them both without demanding that either of them resolve anything tonight. but as she was washing the last of the cups, she heard him say quietly from the table, "I'm not leaving Willow Creek, Abby. I want you to know that. Not at the end of the season. Not when Hale gives up. Not unless you tell me to." Her hands went still in the water. She didn't turn around. "That's—" She paused. "That's a lot." "I know it is." "Nathaniel." "I know." She turned. He was sitting at the table with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man who has jumped and is entirely at peace with the falling regardless of where it lands. She looked at him for a long moment. "Don't make promises you're making in my kitchen," she said. "Make them somewhere else. Somewhere that isn't mine. Where it's harder." He nodded slowly. "All right." "Ask me again," she said. "When it's harder." She turned back to this counter. Behind her she heard him stand. She heard him put his hat on. She heard the sound of him walking to the back door and then stopping. "I'll ask you again," he said. "That's a promise." Then the door opened, and the warm night came in for a moment, and then he was gone. And Abigail stood at her counter with her wet hands and her mother's kitchen, and the low burn of something she had spent most of her life not allowing herself to call hope, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't put it out. She let it burn. The next morning, everything came apart. It started before 6 o'clock, before she had opened the front door or lit the first lamp with a hard knock at the back of the building that had the particular urgency of bad news. She opened it to find Jimmy Teal from the livery hat in hand, sweat on his face, breathing like he'd run the whole way. "Abby." He was trying to catch his breath. "I'm sorry. I'm real sorry to come this early." "Jimmy, what happened? There was a man in the saloon last night." He stopped, breathed. "Talking about Nate. About who he is." He looked at her with the expression of someone delivering a blow they feel personally responsible for. "He was talking to the whole room, Abby," said Nathaniel Carter, the rancher. "The Carter Ranch said he's been here 2 months working under a false name. Said he was up to something. Said—" Jimmy stopped again. "What did he say, Jimmy?" "He said Carter's been after your land. Said the whole thing, the kindness and the fixing up, and that—" Jimmy's voice dropped. "Said it was a play. To get you to trust him, so he could acquire the property before Hale did. Said Carter and Hale have been in competition over this corridor for 2 years. He looked at her miserable. Said you were the mark, Abby. Said the whole town's been watching a man run a con on you and didn't have the decency to warn you." The kitchen was entirely silent. Abigail stood in the doorway and felt the floor do the thing it had done the day Hale showed her the lean documents that small, terrible shift, but worse this time. Much worse. "Who was the man?" she said. "Don't know him. Rode in yesterday. Expensive horse. Fancy coat." Jimmy hesitated. He knew a lot of details about the Carter Ranch, Abby. About the operation, the finances. It wasn't the kind of thing a person invents. She looked past Jimmy into the early morning. The light was going gray and pink along the eastern horizon, and somewhere nearby, a rooster had begun its daily complaint, and the world was insisting on being ordinary in a way that felt almost cruel. "Thank you, Jimmy," she said. Her voice was level. She was very focused on keeping it level. "Thank you for telling me." "I'm sorry," he said again. "Go home." She closed the door. She stood in the middle of her kitchen for a long time. Long enough for the gray-pink light to go fully gold through the east window. Long enough for the rooster to finish and the first sounds of the street to begin. Then she sat down at her mother's table. She thought about everything. She laid it all out in her mind the way she laid out the papers methodically without flinching. Every conversation. Every morning. Every moment where something had felt true. The back step. The peaches. The way he had sat with Douglas Hale's name in his mouth, and that half-second hesitation before he said he'd just heard things. The way he had known exactly what her Carson City letter would contain. The way he had known the lien amount before she did. She thought about what the man in the saloon had said. Carter and Hale in competition for the corridor for 2 years. The kitchen sitting on a piece of land that both men wanted. And a wealthy rancher who appeared conveniently 2 months ago with worn boots and a false name, and a particular talent for making a lonely woman feel seen. She thought about how much she had trusted him. She thought about how close she had come last night, standing at her counter with her wet hands to letting herself believe. And something that had been burning very carefully in her chest. The thing she had decided for the first time in a long time, not to put out, went out on its own. Cold and complete. Like a lamp when the oil runs out. She sat at the table and looked at her mother's recipe book and did not cry. She would not cry. She had been made a fool before. She had been dismissed and mocked and underestimated her entire life, and she had survived all of it by keeping her feet under her and her hands on the work and her heart in a place where it could not easily be reached. She had gotten careless. She would not be careless again. She got up. She lit the stove. She started the coffee. She was going to open the kitchen at 7 o'clock the same as every morning, and she was going to feed whoever came through that door, and she was going to do it with steady hands and a level face, the way her mother had done it, the way she had always done it. And when Nathaniel Carter walked through her door because he would walk through it, she knew that the man did not give up easily. She was going to look him in the eye, and she was going to ask him the one question that nothing she had been told last night could answer for her. She was going to ask him herself, and she was going to know from the way he answered it whether any of it had been real. She measured the coffee, put it in the pot, listened to it begin. She was ready. He came at 7:15. She heard his boots on the front step. She had learned the particular rhythm of them over 2 months heavier on the left. A slight pause before the door, and she was behind the counter with both hands flat on the surface, and her face arranged into something that did not show a single thing she was feeling. The door opened. He came in same as every morning. Hat, vest, the worn boots with the orange-red dust of the Carson County Trail. He looked at her across the kitchen, and whatever he saw in her face made him stop 2 steps inside the door. He did not say good morning. She did not say it either. "Sit down," she said. He sat. Not at his usual table, he pulled out the nearest chair, the one closest to the door, as if some instinct in him understood that this was not a morning for habitual things. She came around the counter. She did not bring coffee. She sat down across from him with her hands folded on the table and looked at him directly. "A man was in the saloon last night," she said, "talking about you." Something moved in his face. Not surprise, something sharper and more complicated than surprise. "What did he say?" Nate asked. "That your name is Nathaniel Carter. That you've been in Willow Creek for 2 months under a false identity." She kept her voice flat, even. The way she'd kept it all morning through the firelighting and the coffee and the bread dough and the long quiet hour of waiting. "That you and Douglas Hale have been competing for this land corridor for 2 years. That this kitchen sits on a piece of ground that both of you want. And that the reason you've been coming in here every morning fixing my steps and bringing me peaches and—" She stopped, took a breath. "Was to get me to trust you, so you could acquire this property before he did." The kitchen was very quiet. Nate looked at her. He had gone very still, the particular stillness she had come to know as his version of controlled. But behind it something was happening. Something that was not the careful containment she'd seen before. Something rawer. "Who was the man?" he said. "I don't know him. Jimmy said expensive horse, fancy coat. Knew a lot of details about the Carter ranch." "Briggs," he said quietly. Not to her, to himself. She watched his jaw tighten. "Your foreman?" she asked. "My former foreman." He looked at her. "I let him go 6 weeks ago, before I left. He'd been skimming the ranch accounts for 2 years. When I found out, I removed him quietly, no sheriff, no public charge. I thought I was being decent." He stopped. "I wasn't being decent. I was being naive." She looked at him. "He knows enough about my business to make any story he tells sound true," Nate said. "And he's got reason to want to damage me." "That's convenient," she said. "I know how it sounds." It sounds like an explanation that arrives at exactly the right moment to explain away exactly the right accusation. "Yes," he said, "it does." He didn't flinch from it, didn't soften it. Just looked at her with those steady brown eyes and let the words sit between them. "I can't make that sound like less than it sounds like. I know that. She held his gaze. "Then tell me the thing that isn't an explanation," she said. "Tell me something I can't explain away." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't want your land," he said. "I have more land than I know what to do with. I have water rights and cattle and a house that rattles in the wind, because I've never filled it with anything worth keeping." His voice was even, but underneath it, she could hear something working. Something that had been locked for a long time pressing against the door. "I came to Willow Creek because I was tired of existing in my own life. I stayed in Willow Creek because of you. Not the property, not the land. You." He paused. "And I know that sounds like exactly what a man running a con would say. I know I cannot prove it to you from a chair in your kitchen. And I know that you are the most practical person I have ever met, and that you will weigh what I'm telling you against what you know and what you don't know and make your own decision." He folded his hands on the table. "But I am asking you to ask yourself one thing." She waited. "In 2 months," he said, "did I ever once push you toward anything? Did I ever steer a conversation toward the property? Did I ever ask what you'd take for it, or suggest you consider selling, or say anything at all that pointed in that direction?" She sat with that. She went back through it, methodically. Every morning, every conversation, every moment where the kitchen and the land and the deed had come up. He had not brought it up once, not once. Every conversation about the property had begun with her. With Hale. With what she had found and what she was doing about it. "No," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. She looked at the table, at her folded hands, at the grain of the wood her mother had smoothed down by hand 20 years ago. Then she looked back up at him. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to answer it without thinking about how it sounds." "All right. Do you have any interest, financial, strategic, any kind, in this piece of land, in this corridor, in anything that this property sits on or near?" A silence, complete and total. "No," he said. "None." She looked at him for a long time. "All right," she said finally. He blinked. "All right, I believe you." She stood. "I don't know if that's smart. I don't know if I'll regret it. But I've been reading people across this counter for 6 years, and I've gotten very good at knowing when something is performed and when it isn't." She looked at him steadily. "What you just said was not performed." He stood too quickly, as if her standing had been a signal. He opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. "Don't say anything grateful right now. It'll ruin it." He closed his mouth. She almost smiled. Didn't. "Sit back down," she said. "I'll get your coffee." The town, however, had heard the story from the saloon. By afternoon, it was everywhere. The version that reached most people contained all the dramatic elements and none of the nuance. Nathaniel Carter, the wealthy rancher, had been living a double life in Willow Creek. He had deceived the town. He had deceived Abby Whitmore in particular. And depending on who was telling the story, his motivations ranged from land acquisition to a darkly romantic obsession to simple rich man sport. Abigail heard 4 different versions before she closed the kitchen at 2. She served food through all of it. When customers brought it up, and most of them did with varying degrees of tact, she said the same thing. "I'm aware of the situation, and I've spoken with him directly. Thank you for your concern." Then she refilled their coffee and moved on. Clara Hatch came in at noon and sat down with the expression of a woman who has been vindicated by the universe and is being restrained about showing it. "Abby," she said, "I told you." "You told me he was a drifter," Abigail said. "He's not." Clara blinked. "That's the problem, Abby. He's not a drifter. He's a wealthy man who ate a cornbread at my table for 2 months and never once asked me for a single thing." Abigail set down Clara's coffee. "I know who he is, Clara. I know more about his situation than the man in the saloon did, and I have made my own assessment." She looked at her steadily. "Same as I always do." Clara opened her mouth, closed it, drank her coffee. Nate came back in at 3 after the lunch crowd had gone and the kitchen had gone quiet. He came in through the front and stood just inside the door, the way he had that very first day, reading the room before committing to it. How bad is it? He asked. Manageable, she said. She was cleaning the far table. Clara Hatch has already been in. Old Pete Granger told me this morning that he always thought something was off about you. Which is interesting because he told me last month you were the most decent young man he'd seen pass through in years. She straightened. People are adjusting their stories to fit the news. It'll settle. I can leave, he said. If it would help. If my being here is making it worse for you. Sit down, Nate. He sat. You leaving doesn't help me, she said. You leaving just means the story ends here, and the version people remember is the one from the saloon. She crossed the room and sat down across from him. Besides, we still have Douglas Hale to deal with. He looked at her. Something moved in his face. Something that was not quite relief and not quite gratitude, and was probably both of those things working together under pressure. You said he said. Don't make a thing of it. I'm not making a thing of it. You were about to. He pressed his lips together. What do you want to do about Hale, and what she wanted to do about Hale turned out to be more complicated than either of them expected, because Hale moved first. The letter arrived the following morning, delivered by his attorney to her front door before she had opened the kitchen. Formal, dense with legal language, 3 pages long. The short version was this. The Territorial Land Trust of Nevada had appointed Douglas Hale as its operating agent with authority to execute the lien on its behalf. The outstanding balance per his attorney's calculation was $540. She had 30 days to satisfy the debt in full or enter into a sale agreement. She sat at her back table and read it twice. Then she walked out to the front of the kitchen where Nate was already at his table. He had started arriving before she opened, not asking for anything. Just present in the way of someone who has made a decision about where they are going to be and is comfortable with it, and she put the letter on the table in front of him. He read it. His face went very still. 30 days, she said. Yes. $540. Yes. She sat down. I have $212 saved. I have the letter from the Reno lawyer coming any day, but even if he says the transfer isn't clean, a legal challenge will take time I don't have. She looked at Nate directly. Talk to me about options that don't involve your checkbook. He was quiet for a moment, working through it. She could see him doing it, real thought, not performance, the kind that left a mark on a person's expression. The land trust, he said finally. If Hale is the operating agent and not the principal, then someone else actually holds the beneficial interest. If we can identify who that is. How? The trust will be registered somewhere. Nevada territory requires registration of private trusts that execute liens. There's a public record. He looked at her. If I ride to Carson City, that's 3 days there and back. Too hard riding. She looked at the letter, at the 30-day clock that had started this morning. And if the principal is someone willing to negotiate a payment plan, directly cutting Hale out of the transaction, then he loses his leverage, Nate finished. And the legal threat goes back to a simple debt which you can manage. She let herself breathe for a moment. There's another problem. Tell me. The Reno lawyer's response. Even if it arrives today and says the transfer is clean, I can fight it legally, but I can't fight it for free, and whatever I spend on lawyers, I can't put toward the $540. I'm squeezed from both sides. He looked at the letter, then at her. What if the town helped? She shook her head immediately. Abby. No. She said it firmly. I am not passing a hat around Willow Creek. I'd rather sell. That's not what I mean. He leaned forward slightly. You've been feeding this town quietly without asking for anything back for 6 years. You've given credit to men who didn't pay it back, and extra portions to children whose fathers looked at the floor when they paid, and medicine money to people you barely knew. He paused. I'm not suggesting charity. I'm suggesting that you let the people you've helped know what's happening, and let them decide what they want to do. Some of them can pay old tabs. Some of them can bring business in ways that build your revenue before the 30 days are up. She looked at him. That's different from passing a hat, he said quietly. She was quiet for a long moment. She stopped. That's not nothing. No. But it still might not be enough. No, he said. It might not. But it's yours. Every dollar of it, every decision, every piece of it yours. She looked at the letter. At the number at the bottom of the last page. $540 and a 30-day window, and a man in a expensive coat who had decided her kitchen was a problem he could solve with paperwork. Ride to Carson City, she said. He stood immediately. Take the deacon's fastest horse. Mr. Deacon owes me 11 breakfasts. He'll say yes. And Nate? She looked up at him. Come back. Something crossed his face. Simple and real and completely without performance. Yes, ma'am, he said. He was gone within the hour. He had been gone for exactly 1 day and 4 hours when the second thing happened. She was closing the kitchen on the first evening, stacking plates in the back, when she heard raised voices from the direction of the street. She came to the front window. A small crowd had gathered outside the general store. Not a large crowd. 7 or 8 people, and at the center of it was a man she didn't recognize arguing with Jimmy Teal. She went outside. The man from the saloon. She knew him before Jimmy could say anything. The expensive coat, the horse tied to the post behind him. The look of a man who was accustomed to arriving somewhere and having things arrange themselves around him. I was younger than she'd expected. 30s. Dark eyes and a set jaw, and the particular energy of someone in the middle of doing something he'd planned for. He was holding a paper. She could see it from 12 feet away, official-looking, stamped. This is a notice of sale, he was saying to Jimmy. Filed this morning with the county recorder, Whitmore Kitchen Lot 47, filed under authority of the Territorial Land Trust of Nevada operating agent Douglas Hale. 30-day notice period beginning today. You can't just, Jimmy started. It's already filed. The man, Hale's attorney, she realized the thin one from before, looked up and saw her. The crowd looked at her too. She walked forward. Mr. Cobb, she said. She had remembered his name. She had made a point of remembering it the day Hale brought him to her table. What do you think you're doing, Miss Whitmore? He extended the paper. A copy for your records. The notice was filed as a matter of public record this morning. You should be aware. I have 30 days, she said. She did not take the paper. That was the letter your client sent me yesterday morning. 30 days. The letter advised you of the option to satisfy the lien or enter into a sale agreement. Filing a public notice of sale is consistent with that time frame. It doesn't alter your 30 days. She looked at him steadily. She understood exactly what this was. Hale had filed the public notice not because he needed to, not yet, but because he wanted Willow Creek to see it. Wanted people to know the kitchen was in play. Wanted to create the impression of inevitability before the clock had even properly started. He wanted her to feel the pressure from both sides, the debt and the audience. She took the paper, looked at it, folded it. She turned to the people standing around her. 7 faces she knew. Pete Granger, the Lundgren brothers, Martha Webb from the boarding house. 2 of the younger cowhands from the Morrison spread, who came in twice a week for coffee and salt pork. A woman named Alice, whose husband had been one of the men whose tab Abigail had carried through a bad winter 3 years back. She looked at all of them. You've all heard by now what's happening, she said. Not loudly. She didn't need loud. The kitchen my mother built has a lien against it that a man from Carson County is trying to use to force a sale. I'm fighting it. I have people looking into the legality of his claim, and a lawyer in Reno who's going to tell me what my options are. She paused. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know what's true from me, so you're not getting it secondhand from someone else. Silence for a moment. Then Alice said, George's tab, from the winter of '74. He never paid it back. Alice. How much was it? Abigail looked at her. I don't keep records of those. I do, Alice said. $14 and some. I'll bring it tomorrow. Pete Granger cleared his throat. I've been coming in every weekday for 11 years, and I've never once left a tip because I'm a cheap old man. I reckon I owe you about $40 in accumulated human decency. One of the Lundgren brothers said, We've got friends coming through on the Morrison Trail next week. I'll send them your way. Abigail stood in the middle of the street and felt something so large and so unexpected move through her that she had to work very hard to keep her face from doing things she would find embarrassing later. "Thank you," she said, simply, because it was all she could manage. Cobb the attorney had watched all of this from the edge of the gathering. He folded his own copy of the notice, put it in his document case, and walked away without a word. The Reno lawyer's letter arrived the next afternoon. She read it at the back table with both hands around a cup of cold coffee and her heart doing something irregular. The news was complicated. The transfer to the Territorial Land Trust had been properly documented, which meant the lien itself was valid. But, and this was the part she read 3 times, the trust's registration listed its registered agent as a Nevada-based law firm that had dissolved in 1876, which meant the trust technically had no currently valid registered agent, which meant any action taken in the trust's name, including appointing Hale as operating agent, including filing the notice of sale, was procedurally defective. It was not a complete victory. A court would need to confirm it. But it was a crack. A real one. She put the letter on the table and looked at the ceiling. 2 things were true. Simultaneously, she had a legal argument that could delay or invalidate Hale's action, and pursuing that argument would take time and money she did not easily have. She was still sitting with both of those truths when she heard the front door. She looked up. Nate was standing in the kitchen. He had ridden hard. She could see it in him. The travel-worn look, the particular exhaustion of a man who had pushed past the comfortable pace and kept going anyway. He had his hat in his hand and a leather folio under his arm, and he was looking at her with an expression that said he had found something. "Sit down before you fall down," she said. He sat. She got up and brought him water and coffee both, and he drank the water without stopping and wrapped his hands around the coffee and finally looked at her. "The trust's principal," he said. "The beneficial owner. I found the registration." She sat down. "Tell me." The Territorial Land Trust of Nevada was established in 1873 by a man named Charles Whitfield. He's a land speculator out of San Francisco, operates through 6 trust structures across the Western Territories. He uses local agents men like Hale to do the operational work while he stays clean on paper. He opened the folio. Whitfield is 81 years old, mostly retired, and the trust has been administered by his grandson for the past 2 years. He set a page in front of her. The grandson's name is Henry Whitfield. He's 24. He inherited the administrative role when the old man's health declined. He paused. Henry Whitfield has been trying to sell the trust's assets, including this lien, for 18 months. He doesn't want to be in the land business. He wants to be a painter. She looked at the page. He's been unable to sell because the trust's registered agent dissolved and the legal status has been unclear, Nate said. Which means Hale, instead of being appointed by a legitimate principal, essentially self-appointed as operating agent, using documentation that Henry Whitfield's grandfather's lawyers drew up years ago, and Henry Whitfield himself may not have sanctioned it. He looked at her. "I have Henry Whitfield's address in San Francisco, and I have in this folio a letter that I wrote on the way back, which explains the situation and offers him a clean sale of the trust's interest in this lien, at the outstanding balance, no premium contingent on him removing Hale as operating agent." She stared at him. "If he accepts," Nate said, "you owe the debt to a private party who wants it off his books, not to Hale. You can negotiate a payment plan. You get Hale out of it entirely. And you fight the procedural defect in court from a position of strength, not desperation." The kitchen was absolutely silent. She looked at the letter in the folio. At his handwriting, which she had never seen before, careful, slightly right-leaning, the writing of a man who had been educated well and had spent years signing things. "You wrote this on horseback," she said. "At a station stop. Took me an hour." She looked up at him. He was watching her with that particular quality of attention, complete and careful and not performing anything. "Nate," she said. "I know it's still money," he said quickly. "I know the debt is still real, and it still has to be paid. I'm not—" "Nate." He stopped. "Stop explaining it," she said. "I understand it. It's good." She paused. "It's very good." He let out a breath. Slow controlled the breath of a man who has been holding something for 2 days of hard writing and is very carefully not showing how much. "Send the letter," she said. He nodded. She looked at him. At the travel dust, and the tired eyes, and the folio he'd carried 2 days across the territory without asking whether she'd want it. "Did you eat?" she said. He blinked. "What? Today. Did you eat?" A pause. "I had something at the last station." "Sit there," she said, standing. "I'm heating up the stew." "Abby, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She was already behind the counter, already at the stove. "That's not the point." He was quiet. She heated the stew and cut bread and brought it to the table without ceremony and sat back down across from him. He looked at the plate with the expression she had seen on that very first day, the expression of a man who hasn't seen something in a while. "Eat," she said. He ate. She watched him and didn't pretend she wasn't watching him, and the kitchen was quiet in the particular way. It was quiet in the late afternoon, when the day had been long and both of them had been carrying more than they showed, and setting it down felt for a moment almost like rest. He finished. Set down the fork. Looked at her. "I want to ask you something," he said. "You said you were going to ask me somewhere that wasn't this kitchen," she said. "I know I did." He didn't look away. "I'm asking anyway." She looked at him. At the worn vest, and the tired eyes, and the letter he had written on horseback, because he had found the one solution that gave her everything back on her own terms. At the 2 months of mornings, and the peaches, and the back step, and every moment that had been true, even when she hadn't known all of it. "Ask," she said. He leaned forward. Both hands flat on the table, the way she stood behind her counter when she needed something solid under her. "I am not asking you about the ranch or the money or any of it," he said. "I am asking about this." He gestured between them. Small, simple. The kitchen, the table, the two of them, and the evening light. "I want to know if this is something you want. Not what makes sense. Not what's practical. What you want." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about what she had said that last evening, before everything broke open, that she had spent her life hearing she was not beautiful enough, not thin enough, not worthy enough. That she had built her life inside those words even as she refused to bow to them, carrying them the way a person carries a stone. They've learned to walk with so accustomed to the weight, they almost don't notice it anymore. She thought about what it had felt like when he looked at her. Not past her, not despite her, but at her the way a man looks at the specific person in front of him, because that specific person is what he came for. She thought about how long it had been since anyone had looked at her that way. She put her hands on the table, across from his. "Yes," she said. "I want this." His hands moved, covered hers, warm and rough and certain. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The evening light was doing its long amber work through the windows and outside. Willow Creek was settling into the sounds of dusk, and somewhere nearby, someone was playing a fiddle badly, but with genuine commitment. "I'm still figuring out how to trust you all the way," she said. "I want you to know that." "I know it. It'll take time." "I have time," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at their hands on the table. At the way his covered hers, completely not controlling, just present. The way a person stands beside something they intend to stay beside. "There's one more thing," she said. He waited. "Hail," she said. "When this is over and the lien is resolved and he has no more legal ground to stand on." She looked up. "I want to be the one who tells him, not you, not a lawyer, me." He looked at her. "I want to look him in the eye," she said, "and tell him that this kitchen is still standing, that my mother's name is still on this deed, and that he picked the wrong woman to push." Something moved in Nate's face. The full version of that almost smile she had been catching glimpses of for 2 months finally present and complete. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She almost smiled back. She didn't, but it was close. Henry Whitfield wrote back in 11 days. Abigail was serving the morning rush when the letter arrived, brought by the postal rider who came through Willow Creek on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and who had learned over the past 2 weeks to bring anything addressed to the kitchen directly to her, rather than leaving it at the general store. She set it on the shelf behind the counter and did not open it until the last customer had gone and the kitchen had emptied and the quiet of the early afternoon had settled in. Nate was at his table. He had been there since 9, nursing coffee and doing nothing in particular in the way he had been present every day since he came back from Carson City, not hovering, not managing, just there. Available. Like a person who had made a decision about where they belonged and had stopped needing to justify it. She picked up the letter, broke the seal, read it standing at the counter. She read it twice. Then she set it down on the counter and looked at Nate. He said yes, she said. Nate was on his feet before she finished the sentence. She held up a hand. Sit. Let me finish. She picked the letter back up. He said yes, he wants the trust's interest in the lien satisfied and closed. He never sanctioned Hale as operating agent. He says his grandfather's old lawyers sent Hale the documentation without consulting him, and he only found out about the notice of sale when our letter arrived. She looked up from the page. He's instructing his attorney to remove Hale from any role in the trust, and he's agreed to a payment plan. She paused. $40 a month for 13 months. The kitchen was very quiet. $40 a month, Nate said carefully. Which I can manage, she said. Especially with Alice's payment and Pete's overdue tips and the new business from the Morrison Trail crew. She set the letter down flat on the counter, smoothed it with her palm. It's done. The legal ground Hale was standing on is gone. Nate looked at her for a long moment. Abby, he said. Don't, she said. But she was smiling. Small and real and entirely her own. He sat back down, picked up his coffee, set it down again. He was working very hard to contain something, and she appreciated the effort, even as she recognized it was only partially succeeding. I want to be there when you tell him, Nate said. I know you do. I'll stand in the back. I won't say a word. I know that too. She folded the letter carefully, put it in the pocket of her apron against her heart, the same place her mother used to keep important things. I'll tell him today. He's at the hotel on 2nd Street through the end of the week. Do you want me to? I'll go alone, she said. But you can walk me there. He put his hat on. Douglas Hale was in the hotel dining room when she arrived, finishing a late lunch with 2 men she didn't recognize. He looked up when she came in, and something crossed his face. Not alarm, not yet, but the instinctive recalibration of a man who has learned to read approaching situations quickly. She stopped at the edge of his table. She did not sit down. She had not been invited to sit, and she did not want to sit. Miss Whitmore, he said. Careful. Controlled. Mr. Hale. She took the letter from her pocket, set it on the table in front of him without unfolding it. Henry Whitfield has agreed to a direct payment plan with me for the outstanding Lion balance. He has removed you as operating agent of the Territorial Land Trust. She kept her voice even and clear, the voice she used across her counter every day. Not loud, not soft, just certain. Your attorney's notice of sale has been withdrawn effective as of this morning, when my Reno lawyer filed the procedural challenge to the trust's registration. She paused. The kitchen at Lot 47 is not for sale. It was not for sale when you first came to my table. It was not for sale when you brought a document designed to frighten me. And it is not for sale now. Hale looked at the letter. He did not pick it up. One of the men beside him started to say something. Hale put a hand out, a small, quiet gesture, and the man stopped. You were more than I took you for, Hale said. The same thing he had said the last time, but different now. The first time it had been a concession made while retreating. This time it was something else, something closer to genuine. Most people are, she said. The same answer she had given before. She meant it just as much. She picked the letter back up, put it back in her pocket. I'd suggest, she said, that you find a different corridor. She turned and walked out of the hotel dining room without looking back, and the morning light hit her when she stepped outside, and Nate was standing on the boardwalk 10 feet from the door with his hat in his hand and his eyes on her face. She walked to him, stopped. Done? He asked. Done, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he held out his arm, Formal, deliberate, the gesture of a man who had been raised to do things properly, and was choosing to do this one properly. She took his arm. They walked back to the kitchen together, and neither of them said anything, and it was the best kind of silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. The town noticed the change, the same way it had noticed everything else, which was immediately and with strong opinions. The story that settled after all the versions and counter-versions and saloon talk had worn themselves out was roughly true. Nathaniel Carter had come to Willow Creek as an ordinary man and had been treated as one by Abigail Whitmore, who had not known and had not cared about the ranch or the money, and had built something with him in the daily ordinary space of her kitchen that neither of them had planned and both of them had chosen to keep. Some people found this romantic. Some people found it suspicious. Clara Hatch found it both, which she expressed at length to whoever would listen, and eventually found that fewer and fewer people were listening. Old Pete Granger said at his corner table on a Thursday morning in the third week of September, loud enough for the whole kitchen to hear, "I've been watching people come through this town for 30 years. That man looks at her like she's the first real thing he's found. And she looks at him like she's been waiting to decide if he means it." He sipped his coffee. "She's decided." Abigail, who was behind the counter and had heard every word, did not turn around. But her shoulders did something that might, to a careful observer, have been interpreted as a very small, very pleased movement. The harder conversation came on a Sunday. Not hard, like the confrontations with Hale had been hard, not external, not a fight with a clear opponent. This was the kind of hard that happened in quiet rooms between people who had started to matter to each other and had not yet worked out all the terms. Nate came in after the kitchen had closed. He had that look she had come to recognize, not the contained anger look, not the careful patience look. This was something more exposed. The look of a man who has been working up to something and has decided today is the day. She poured 2 cups of coffee without being asked and sat across from him. "I need to go back to the ranch," he said. She wrapped her hands around her cup. "I know. Briggs left it in good shape when he left, but there's been nobody running it properly for 4 months, and Clint my second, he's good, but he needs direction on the fall cattle decisions." He looked at his cup. "I've been putting it off." "I know you have. I don't want to leave." "I know that too." He looked up. "Come with me." She looked at him. "Not." He stopped. Reorganized. "I'm not asking you to leave the kitchen. I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm asking you to come and see it. The ranch, the valley." He paused. "I want you to see where I come from. I want you to know all of it, not just the parts of me that fit in a chair at this table." He held her gaze. "And I want to know if it..." He stopped again. This was not a man who struggled with words. Watching him struggle with these ones told her more than the words themselves would have. "You want to know if I fit there," she said quietly. "I want to know if you want to," he said. "That's different." She sat with that for a moment. The coffee was warm in her hands. The kitchen was quiet around them, her mother's kitchen. The cast-iron stove, the worn counter, the recipe book on the shelf, the deed on the wall in its plain frame. Everything she had fought to keep. "The kitchen can't close," she said. "I know. I'd need someone to run it. A week, maybe 2. "I know. I'd need to think about who." "Take the time you need." She looked at him. "You're going to wait." "Yes." "That's..." She paused. "That's a long way from here for a man with a ranch to run." "It is," he agreed. "Nathaniel." He looked at her. "I'll come," she said. The thing that happened to his face then was not the almost smile she had been cataloging all summer. It was the full version, the complete and unguarded version, the one that made him look about 10 years younger and a great deal less careful, and it lasted only a moment before he brought it back under control. But she had seen it. She filed it away. 2 weeks, she said. "I need 2 weeks to make arrangements." 2 weeks, he said. She stood and picked up her cup. "Now go home, Nathaniel. It's Sunday, and I have bread to start for tomorrow, and you've been sitting in that chair since 2 o'clock. He stood smiling and picked up his hat. At the door he paused. "Margaret Soules," he said. She looked at him. "What?" "To run the kitchen. She managed her late husband's feed store for 6 years. She's organized, she's reliable, and she has been eating your food 4 days a week for as long as I can tell." He paused. "And I think she feels guilty about the conversations she had with you in August." Abigail stood in the middle of her kitchen and looked at the door, and then at the hat in his hand, and then at the expression on his face, which was entirely serious. "You've been thinking about this," she said. "For 2 weeks," he said. She picked up her apron, tied it on. "Good night, Nate." He smiled, walked out. She stood there for a moment after the door closed, looking at the space where he had been, and then she turned to the stove and started the bread. And she was still thinking about the look on his face, and she decided that was all right. Some things were worth thinking about. Margaret Soles said yes immediately, which surprised Abigail, and then on reflection, did not surprise her at all. "I've been wanting to say something to you since August," Margaret said, sitting at the back table with her hands folded, the posture of a woman who has prepared a speech and intends to deliver it. "About what I said to you. About him being a drifter. About being realistic." She paused. "I was wrong. Not about the facts, I didn't know the facts, but about the spirit of it. I was telling you to want less, and that was not right." Abigail looked at her. "I would be proud," Margaret said, "to run this kitchen for 2 weeks. Your mother was kind to me when I came to this town, and I never properly paid that back. This is—" She stopped. "This is a chance." Abigail sat across from her. "You'll need to know the bread recipe." "I'll learn it." "The coffee has to be strong or the drovers complain." "I've heard them complain. I'll make it strong. Old Pete Granger has his coffee a certain way, and if you do it wrong, he'll tell you about it every day." "I've known Pete Granger for 20 years, Margaret said. "I can manage Pete Granger." Abigail almost smiled. "All right." "All right," Margaret said. They spent 3 days going over everything. Every recipe, every habit, every customer's particular preference, every number in the ledger. Margaret wrote everything down in her careful schoolteacher's handwriting and asked good questions and did not try to change a single thing, which was the thing Abigail had been most afraid she would do. On the morning Abigail was leaving, she stood in her kitchen at 5 o'clock and looked at all of it: the stove, the counter, the shelf with the recipe book, the deed in its frame on the wall. She ran her hand along the countertop. The wood was smooth under her palm. Her mother's hands had smoothed it. Her own hands had smoothed it further. It would be there when she came back. She put her coat on and picked up her bag. The Carter Ranch was 3 hours east, and for the first hour of the ride, Abigail sat straight in the saddle and watched the country change and said very little. Nate rode beside her and matched her silence, which was one of his better qualities. The understanding that silence was sometimes not a gap to be filled. Then somewhere in the second hour, when the hills had opened up into the wide flat reach of the valley, and she could see the river bending silver in the distance, he said, "There." She looked. The ranch house sat on a rise above the river, a large 2-story structure with a long porch running its full front length, and the kind of solidity that came from being built to last. Behind it, outbuildings and barn, and the geometry of good fencing, stretching away into the valley in every direction. Cattle in the lower fields. The smell of grass and water, and the particular clean air of a place that had been well kept. It was more than she had imagined. She had known the numbers: 43,000 acres, 1,800 cattle. But numbers were not the same as standing at the edge of the valley and seeing what those numbers looked like, spread out under the September sky. She said nothing for a moment. "It's a lot," Nate said beside her. "Yes." "I know it is." She looked at him. He was watching her face with the careful attention he always gave her, reading whatever was there without pushing for more than she was showing. "It doesn't scare me," she said. "That's what I'm trying to work out. I thought it would scare me, and it doesn't." Something shifted in his expression, gentle and significant. "Why not?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "Because it's yours," she said. "Not mine. I'm not walking into something I have to carry. I'm walking into something you built, and you know how to carry it, and that's—" She paused. "That's different from what I expected it to feel like." He looked at her for a long moment. "It could be yours too." She met his eyes. "Ask me again," she said. "When we've had more time." "How much time?" "Enough that I know the answer without having to think about it." He nodded once. "Fair enough." They rode down into the valley together, and the ranch came up around them, and she watched his posture change as they got closer. Something in him settling the particular way a person settles when they're approaching the place that belongs to them. She recognized it because she felt the same thing every morning when she came down the path to her kitchen. That recognition meant something to her. She filed it away. The twist came on the second day. She had not expected it, and it arrived like most real things did, sideways from a direction she hadn't been watching. She was in the ranch kitchen with a woman named Dora the cook, who had been with the Carter Ranch for 12 years, learning the geography of the space and the particular system Dora had built over those 12 years when she heard voices from the front of the house. Raised voices. She recognized Nate's, and one she didn't. She came to the doorway. A man was standing in the main room, well-dressed her age, with the dark eyes and the set jaw of someone who had come with a purpose and intended to achieve it. He was holding his hat in both hands and looking at Nate with the particular expression of someone delivering news they have prepared for. "I've been writing for 2 days, Nathaniel," the man said. "I didn't come for an argument. I came because you needed to hear this from someone who gives a damn about you." Nate's back was to her. She could see the set of his shoulders, the controlled tension posture, the one she had learned to read. "Then say it, Garrett," he said. "The Carson County Bank is calling in the note on the East water rights," Garrett said. "The one your father secured in '69. It was on a 15-year term. Term ends in November. They're not renewing." A silence. She stayed in the doorway. "That note," Nate said carefully, "covers the water rights for the lower fields. I know what it covers. Without those rights, the lower cattle operation." "I know," Garrett said. "I know what it means, Nathaniel. That's why I rode 2 days to tell you in person instead of sending a letter." He paused. "There's something else." She had the distinct feeling she should not be hearing this. She took a step back. "The bank's new principal investor," Garrett said, "is Douglas Hale." She stopped moving. Nate was silent for 3 full seconds. "When?" he said. His voice had gone to the flat and quiet place she had heard once before, the morning she had confronted him about his identity. The place that was not blankness, but something far more controlled than anger. "He took the position 6 weeks ago, before any of this, before Willow Creek." Garrett's voice was careful. "I don't know if it's connected." "It's connected," Nate said. "You don't know that." "Garrett." He turned then, and she could see his face composed, absolutely composed, but with something behind his eyes that was working very fast. He saw her in the doorway. He held her gaze for a moment, and she could see him deciding in real time how to handle the fact that she had heard all of that. He did not look away from her. "This is Abigail Whitmore," he said to Garrett. His voice was level, no hesitation. "She's—" He paused for just a moment, and what he chose was the simplest and most complete thing he could have said. "She's the most important person in this room." Garrett turned, looked at her, looked at Nate, made a rapid recalculation. "Ma'am," he said with a hat tip of genuine respect. She walked fully into the room. "Tell me about the water rights note," she said to Garrett. He glanced at Nate. Nate gave him a look that clearly communicated answer her. Garrett answered her. She listened to all of it, the 15-year term, the bank's change of ownership, the timeline, the financial exposure. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Is there another bank that would refinance?" "Possibly. Reno Federal has been expanding its land-backed lending." "The same Reno Federal that our lawyer works with?" she asked, looking at Nate. "Different division," Nate said. He was watching her with the expression she had filed away from Sunday, not the almost smile, the full one, the unguarded one. "But the same institution." "Then you have a relationship," she said. "And a relationship is worth more than starting fresh with a new bank." She looked at Garrett. "The water rights themselves, are they documented cleanly? Solid as they come. Original grant from the territorial government. Then the note is a financial problem, not a legal one. She folded her hands. Financial problems have more solutions than legal ones. Garrett looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Nate. Where did you find her? She found me, Nate said. They worked on it for 2 days. Not just Nate and Garrett, her at the table with the ledgers open and the letter from the Reno lawyer and the documentation Garrett had brought, going through the numbers the way her mother had taught her to go through numbers. Methodically, without flinching from what they said. On the second evening, she had a plan on paper that she was reasonably confident about. Nate read it twice. Garrett read it once and let out a long, slow breath. This works, Garrett said. It should work, she said. The third option, refinancing through Reno Federal, with the East water rights as primary collateral and the Carter Ranch land deed as secondary, gives you a 20-year term at favorable rates because the land value makes the risk nominal. Hale gains nothing because the note moves out of his bank before the November deadline. He has no legal mechanism to block a voluntary refinancing. He'll be furious, Garrett said. Good, Nate said. She looked at him. This is what you need to do, in the next 2 weeks, before I go back to Willow Creek. Garrett looked between them. You're going back? I have a kitchen, she said simply. Nate was looking at her with the careful, complete attention she had stopped trying to be unaware of. You're not staying, he said. Not yet, she said. But, I told you, she said gently but clearly. Ask me again when we've had enough time that I know the answer without thinking. She looked at him. You just found out that Douglas Hale is coming at you from a different direction. You need to spend the next month fixing that. And I need to go back and run my kitchen and pay my $40 to Henry Whitfield and... She stopped. We both have things that are ours, that we built. We don't have to give them up to be in the same story. He held her gaze for a long time. You're right, he said. I know I am. The corner of his mouth moved. You always know. Usually, she said. Don't make it a habit to test that. Garrett stood very abruptly and announced that he needed to check on his horse, which was transparent and considerate in equal measure, and left the room. Nate set the papers down. He looked at her directly, fully, the way he had looked at her that first real moment in the kitchen, when everything he was holding had moved without permission and changed direction. I need to say something to you, he said. Then say it. I have spent 3 years building a life around everything except what mattered. His voice was even, but underneath it, she could hear the weight of it, real weight, the kind that comes from long carrying. I had the land, I had the money, I had the name. And I was so hungry for something real that I packed a bag and ran west and walked into a roadside kitchen and sat down at the worst table in the room. He paused. And the woman behind the counter treated me like a person before she knew a single thing about what I owned. And I didn't know what to do with that because I had forgotten what it felt like. He looked at his hands on the table. I still don't entirely know what to do with it. But I know that I am not going back to a life that doesn't have you in it. Whatever shape that takes, whatever time it needs. You decide the pace, Abby. You always decide the pace. But I need you to know that I have decided. The room was very quiet. She looked at him. At the man who had walked into her kitchen with worn boots and a false name and 2 months of accumulated honesty that she had chosen to believe. Who had ridden 2 days to Carson City and come back with a solution built entirely on her terms. Who had just told her simply, and without ornamentation, the truest thing she had heard from another person in a very long time. I know you've decided, she said. I decided too. She held his gaze. I just need to do it in my own time. I know. And my own way. I know that too. She reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. Then we're in the same story, she said. We're just writing different parts of it right now. He turned his hand over, held hers. All right, he said. She went back to Willow Creek on a Thursday morning 2 weeks and 1 day after she had left. Margaret had run the kitchen with quiet competence and had already renegotiated the price she paid the flour supplier, which Abigail noted with genuine respect. Pete Granger reported that the coffee had been adequate. The Lundgren brothers said they had brought 6 trail crew members in, and all 6 had said they'd be back. The kitchen was standing. Everything was in order. Abigail stood in the middle of her mother's kitchen and breathed it in, and felt the particular irreplaceable rightness of a place where you belong. Nate arrived 3 days later. He came in at his usual time, sat at his usual table, set his hat on the table, and wrapped his hands around the coffee cup she brought without being asked. He had resolved the water rights. The refinancing had gone through Reno Federal in a week faster than either of them had expected. Douglas Hale had no legal mechanism to stop it, and no longer had any claim on the Carter Ranch's financial structure. He had apparently left Carson County the day after the paperwork was filed and had not been heard from since. "He'll go somewhere else," Nate said. "Find something else to acquire." "Probably," Abigail said, "but not this." "Not this," he agreed. She refilled his coffee. He watched her do it. "I want to build something here," he said. She looked at him. "Not instead of the ranch," he said quickly. "Not instead of anything. I mean here, in Willow Creek. Something that's—" He paused. "I've been thinking about what you said, that we don't have to give up what's ours to be in the same story. And I've been thinking about what it would look like if the things we both built—" He stopped. "What if we built the next thing together?" She stood at the table and looked at him. At the hat. At the hands around the cup. At the face she had been reading all summer and had gotten very good at. "What kind of thing?" she said. "This kitchen," he said. "Expanded. Properly. A real dining room, not just tables in a small wooden building. A place that could seat the whole town. That could serve the cattle operations passing through. That could be what your mother always meant for it to be, if she'd had the resources to make it that." He looked at her steadily. "Your name on it. Your mother's recipes. Your kitchen. He paused. "I just want to be the one who helps you make it bigger." She looked at him for a long time. "My name on it," she said. "Your name on the deed. Your name on the door. Your decisions about what it is and how it runs." He held her gaze. "I'm not buying your kitchen, Abby. I'm asking to invest in what you've already built. There's a difference." She sat down, across from him, her hands on the table. "You know what people will say," she said. "Yes. They'll say you saved me, that I couldn't do it alone." "You did do it alone," he said. "You fought Hale without me. You found the letters, the legal defect, the land trust. You looked him in the eye and told him it was over. I was—" He paused. "I was there. I was useful when you let me be. But you did it." She looked at his face, at the complete settled certainty there. "Yes," she said quietly. "I did." "This is different," he said. "This isn't rescue. This is two people who have things the other one doesn't, and choosing to put them together." He paused. "You have this kitchen, and everything it means, and everything your mother built here. I have resources and reach and contacts, and the ability to make things larger." He looked at her. "Neither one of us has what we'd have together." She sat with that for a moment. She thought about her mother, who had come to this town with a cast-iron stove, and a recipe book, and a husband who left, and a daughter who stayed. Who had built something from very little, and kept it running through hard winters, and harder men, and the long grinding work of a woman alone. Who had wanted maybe for something to be larger than she could make it by herself, but had not had anyone to make it larger with. She thought about what her mother would say sitting at this table looking at this man. She thought her mother would say, "Don't let pride get in the way of something real." "All right," she said. He looked at her. "All right. Yes." She met his eyes. "Together. But on terms we both agree to. Written down." "Written down," he agreed immediately. "And my name on the deed." "Your name on the deed." "And I run the kitchen." "You run everything," he said. "I just make sure the walls are solid." She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she picked up her coffee cup and held it out across the table. He looked at it, then at her. He picked up his cup. They touched the rims together. Simple. No ceremony. "Partners," she said. "Partners," he said. The new dining room opened the following spring. They built it onto the existing kitchen, doubling the space, adding a proper dining room with good windows and solid chairs and a long bar along the east wall where coffee and food were served from 6 in the morning until 8 at night. The deed listed 2 names. The sign above the door read Whitmore's, and below it in smaller letters, East, 1879. Her mother's name, not his, not both, hers. He had insisted on that. She had not argued. Old Pete Granger came in on opening morning and sat at his corner table, which had been moved at his specific request to maintain exactly the same angle to the window, and looked around at the new space and the new tables and the new bar and the same cast iron stove visible through the kitchen pass-through. "Same coffee," he said. "Same coffee," Abigail said. He raised his cup. "Then I've got nothing to complain about." She smiled. A full one. Behind her, through this pass-through window, she could hear Nate in the kitchen, where he had been since 5 that morning, helping Dora and the 2 girls they had hired get the prep work done before opening, moving around the space she had built as comfortably as if he had always been in it. Clara Hatch came in mid-morning, sat down, looked around and said with a complicated expression that was fighting between grudging admiration and the desire to find something critical. "Well, it's very nice, Abby." "Thank you, Clara. Your mother would have loved it." Abigail stopped moving for a moment, looked at the counter, at the recipe book on its shelf, which she had moved from the old position to the new one, and which sat in exactly the same relation to the stove as it always had. Yes, she said, she would have. Clara drank her coffee, and for once in her life had nothing else to add. Nate came out of the kitchen at noon, when the first real rush had broken. He stood beside her behind the counter and looked out at the full dining room. Every table taken noise and movement, and the smell of good food, and the sound of people who were not going to leave hungry. "Well," he said quietly. "Well," she said. He looked at her sideways. "How does it feel?" She looked at the room, at the deed on the wall framed the same as the old one had been in the same plain frame, at the sign visible through the front window from inside. Whitmore's in letters she had painted herself on a Saturday in March, while he held the ladder and did not offer opinions about the lettering until she asked. She looked at all of it. "Like it was always going to be this," she said. "Like it just needed time to get here." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Abby." She looked at him. He reached into his vest pocket, brought out something small, set it on the counter between them, not reaching for her hand, not making a performance of it, just setting it there. Plain and deliberate, and entirely him. A ring. Simple gold. No ornamentation. She looked at it, then at him. "I told you I'd ask again," he said. "Somewhere harder." "This is my kitchen," she said. "I know it is." "You said somewhere that wasn't yours." "I said somewhere harder." He held her gaze. "This is the hardest place I know. Because everything that matters to you is in this room, and I have to ask you in front of all of it." He paused. "In front of your mother's recipes, and your deed, and Pete Granger in the corner, who is absolutely watching us right now." She glanced. Pete Granger was in fact watching them with the focused attention of a man who has been waiting for this moment and is not going to miss it. She looked back at Nate. She thought about what she had told him all those months ago. That she was not waiting around for someone to have mercy on her. That she was not in a situation that required pity or management. That she had built this kitchen and this life and this self on her own terms, from the ground up, the way her mother had, the way women like them had always had to. She thought about what it meant that none of that had to stop being true in order for this to also be true. "Yes," she said. He picked up the ring, took her hand. Steady and certain the way he did everything that mattered. From this corner, Pete Granger began clapping. 2 others joined him. Then 4, then the whole room, and Abigail stood in the middle of her mother's kitchen. Her kitchen. Whitmore's on Lot 47 in Willow Creek, the piece of land that nobody had managed to take from her, and felt the sound wash over her, and did not try to contain what was on her face. She had spent her whole life being told she was too much, or not enough, or not the right shape for the world to accommodate. She had kept cooking anyway. and the world had eventually come around to her table. Every last hungry, difficult, complicated piece of it. That was what her mother had always said. Keep the door open, keep the food hot, keep going. Abigail looked at Nate, and at the ring on her finger, and at her mother's recipe book on the shelf, and at the full dining room of people who were warm and fed, and sitting under the sign that had her name on it. She kept going. She always had. And now for the first time she did not have to do it alone.